Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Aizawa Found Deku on the Roof at 2 a.m.? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Shoyuta sat at his desk reading over the reports that his students had turned in that morning, his red pen flying across the pages as he made corrections. Some papers were more notably marked than others. Mainly Kaminari's and Ishido's. Kirishima had made huge improvements under the tutelage of Bakugo. Shoyuta sometimes wonders how some of them even passed the entrance exams. How the hell had Kaminari misspelled his name as Calamari? That's not even how you spell that. Maybe he did it on purpose? Shoyuta prayed he did it on purpose. It was a sad day when Shoyuta was praying for his students to be idiots on purpose. He was almost halfway through the papers when an alarm in his room sounded, not loud enough to wake Eri, sleeping one room over. The top floor of the dorms had been made into an apartment of sorts, for the teachers to reside in while overseeing the students. The room Eri was in had once been his office, but had been quickly converted into a bedroom when it was decided that he was going to be her guardian. Eraserhead, the high-pitched voice of one of the many security robots that traversed the school, called over the speaker in his room. Student on the roof of the dorm. It's past curfew. Deal with it. The alarm ended, thankfully, once the robot made its announcement. Sighing and rubbing the back of his neck in agitation, Shoyuta reached for his phone to check the time. Clicking his phone on, the time revealed it to be 2 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, he wasn't the only one who should have been asleep in bed. Grabbing his capture weapon from the hook on his door, he quickly left his apartment and made his way to the roof. I swear if I find Tokoyami and Dark Shadow screaming into the void, I will throw them into the void. Shoyuta thought to himself as he pushed open the rooftop door. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the darkness outside, and when they did he felt his blood run cold with fear. Sitting on the edge of the roof looking down was none other than his number one problem child, Midoriya Izuku. What alarmed him even more was the soft sniffles and whimpering sounds coming from the boy. Shuta's thoughts were racing a mile a minute. Don't freak, this kid cries all the time. It's nothing new. Shoyuta tried to reason. The more grim part of his mind challenged that. Why would he be sitting on the ledge of the roof then? It's not very safe. And he's crying on the ledge of the roof. Shoyuta didn't want to assume suicide, but to Shuta's rational mind, that's what it looked like. Why would one of the happiest kids I know consider suicide? The kid has a smile that could light up a room. Logically, he knew that some of the most depressed people out there could smile like nothing was wrong. And being depressed doesn't mean you can't be happy. Shoyuta just wondered what could have pushed the kid to this point. Not waiting another moment, Shoyuta threw out his capture weapon, wrapping it tightly around the boy before yanking it. Midoriya let out a startled yelp as he was roughly launched away from the roof's edge and into Shuta's arms as he dashed forward to catch his student. Startled, Midoriya thrashed around while trying to activate his quirk in order to escape. The many villain attacks had left the students with fight first ask questions later response. When Midoriya's quirk didn't activate, his struggles slowed until they finally stopped. Realization as to who possibly had him finally settling in. He quickly glanced up into the determined face of his homeroom teacher, relaxing as he realized that it was, indeed, his teacher who held him and not a villain. Tears long forgotten the boy asked, "Mr. Aizawa? What are you doing? Why are you here? Not that you need a reason to be here, you live here too. But what? Why grab me with the capture weapon?" Shoyuta slowly unwound his weapon from around the child and settled it back over his shoulders, taking a moment to calm his nerves before he spoke. He turned Midoriya around to face him, and taking a deep breath while keeping a firm hand rested on the boy's shoulder, he spoke. "I'll ask the questions here, Midoriya." Shoyuta activated his quirk, his hair lifting to float above him as indication that he wasn't in the mood for any bullshit, and dropping it when he was satisfied with Midoriya's reaction. Midoriya nodded his head in acknowledgement, at breakneck speeds, clearly frightened by his teacher. Shoyuta opened his mouth to begin quizzing the boy but quickly snapped his mouth shut. This was not where he wanted to have this conversation, the roof's edge looming ominously in the background. Grabbing Midoriya by the wrist, he pulled him back into the dorm. "Come with me," he growled, dragging the problem child by the wrist back to his apartment. The boy stumbled a few times, trying to keep up with Shura's long strides. Once inside his home, he ushered the boy into the living room and onto the worn black leather couch that he has owned since he lived in his first apartment right after graduating UA. He sat himself on the coffee table in front of Midoriya and stared at him. Midoriya sat stiffly on the couch, clearly nervous and unsure how to act in front of the strict teacher. "Mr. Aizawa, what?" Midoriya began, but was cut off when Shoyuta held his hand up to silence the teenager. Shoyuta was leaned forward with his elbow on his knee and his hand covering his eyes. They sat in silence for a few minutes while Shoyuta gathered his thoughts. What could have possibly happened to push the school cinnamon roll this far? He is surrounded by friends that adore him. He has good grades. The teachers adore him. All Might adores him. Is it something at home? He's an only child being raised by a single mother, and from what All Might said, she loves him to the moon and back. So why? Realizing that the only way he will get any answers to his questions is by asking the boy, he sighs and resigns himself to this uncomfortable but necessary conversation. Shoyuta slowly sits up and looks at the boy in front of him, who was beginning to turn blue. "Breath, Midoriya," Shoyuta commands, rolling his eyes as Midoriya gasps, taking in deep breaths. Poor kid was just a bundle of nerves. "You're not in trouble, kid, so stop panicking." "Okay." Shoyuta waits as the teen nods slowly, doing his best to compose himself. The tears on his face have long since dried, but his eyes are still red-rimmed. "Now can you tell me why you were going to jump off the roof?" That was clearly the wrong thing to say, as the boy jumps to his feet trembling and stuttering. Wasn't going to jump. I would and never." Shoyuta jumps to his feet too, roughly placing his hand over Midoriya's mouth. They stand like that, Midoriya frozen from shock with Shura's hand over his mouth, and Shoyuta listening for any sign that Eri had woken up. Once he's sure that the little girl is still asleep, he removes his hand and pushes Midoriya back onto the couch. "Please keep your voice down, Eri is asleep." Midoriya takes a deep breath and nods his head. "If you weren't planning on jumping, then just what were you doing? Because from my perspective, it seemed like you were strongly considering it." Shoyuta hesitantly reached forward and pats Midoriya on the knee. "I promise I won't be mad at you if that's what you were planning, I only want to help." Midoriya takes in a shuddering breath. Soft sobs rack the boy's body as he tries to keep himself from being too loud. It takes a few minutes for Midoriya to regain most of his control. The tears and sobs finally subsiding, he still trembles and his voice wavers. I just like to be outside when I'm upset. Looking at the stars calms me down. The best place to see them is from the roof. I must have lost track of the tea time. I wasn't going to jump, I swear. I could never do that to my mom. It would break her heart." He won't jump because it would break his mom's heart? Is that the only thing stopping him? Or is it the main thing? I just haven't had a breakdown that bad in a while. Midoriya continues. "I thought looking at the stars would help. I don't even remember going over to the edge, honestly." He doesn't remember going to the edge? That's not good? Isn't that like dissociation? Boo, but I wouldn't have jumped. I've never considered jumping, even when I was told to. Shoyuta interrupts Midoriya's mumbling, grabbing both his shoulders, squeezing tightly and looking deeply into his eyes. "The F, did he just say? He was told to. To what?" "Midoriya," Shoyuta begins, an edge to his voice. "Did you just say someone told to commit suicide?" The teen freezes, realizing his slip-up. He looks down, away from Shoyuta and closes his mouth tightly, determined to remain silent. Realizing he won't get Midoriya to say anything about that right now, Shoyuta changes topics. All right. Can you at least tell me what upset you tonight? You were fine earlier today. What happened?" Midoriya relaxes at the change of topic. It's not much, but it's something. Shoyuta removes his hands from around the boy's shoulders. He makes a last-second decision and ruffles the boy's green curly hair, before scooting back on the coffee table out of the boy's personal space. He's still close, but the kid has more breathing room again, although their knees keep bumping into each other. After taking a few deep breaths, Midoriya answers him. Today is my parents' anniversary. My dad works overseas, and we might hear from him once a year. My mom bears with it because she loves my dad. Unconditionally, but it's hard for her. Shoyuta hears a hint of resentment in Midoriya's voice, but he's not sure if it's directed towards his mother or his father. Maybe both? It's especially hard for her on anniversaries and birthdays. This is the first year that she's had to face it alone. I've always been there for her, to help make it easier. She needs me to be there for her, and I can't. Not will all the villain attacks. Midoriya takes a deep breath, wringing his hands together. He still hasn't looked up at Shoyuta. Probably thinks I'll look at him with pity. Shoyuta wouldn't. He's not the type to let his emotions, other than anger or boredom, show on his face. He also doesn't show pity when it's not wanted or needed. Sure, having an absent parent, Esikis, should his own parents were hardly around, and when they were assholes. But Midoriya Inko was obviously more than capable of raising her son on her own. She had been for many years. There was no reason to pity the boy, not in Shuta's mind at least. Midoriya sighed and rubbed at his arms. I just hate that he never calls her. It's like she doesn't exist to him, until he happens to remember her. I don't exist at all. Shoyuta winces. Not being acknowledged by his father probably hurt the boy a lot. Shoyuta can sympathize a little. At one point when he was small, he had wanted his father's attention too. And I just hate that I'm not able to be with her like she's used to. It's hard for her. Cue internal confused Scooby-Doo sound. Hard for her. But not you? Well, that's probably normal. Teenagers don't want to spend every waking moment around their parents. They want to be independent and live their own lives. Maybe if I had been useful when I was a kid, he would have felt the need to be more involved, and could be with her more. Kids shouldn't have to do anything to earn their parents' love. Midoriya lets out a small whine, head hanging lower than before. I could tell that she had been crying a lot, and I wasn't there for her. Shoyuta had been listening, and he wasn't pleased, if the pinched lines between his eyebrows was any indication. So far all I've heard is how he's sad because his mom is sad, because she misses her husband. What about you? What about how it makes you feel? You have feelings too. It shouldn't be all about her. Shoyuta thinks to himself. Leaning forward, he places his index finger under Midoriya's chin and tilts his head up to meet his own gaze. Midoriya's eyes widen at the use of his given name. Shoyuta doesn't usually call his students by their given names, but given how honest the kid was being with him, he decided to forego formalities. It's SCKS that your mom is sad, but she's an adult and can deal with her own emotions and take care of herself. You are the child, and it's not your responsibility to take care of her emotionally. So far all I've heard is how your father's absence affects her, but what about you? What do you feel? Removing his hand from Mizuku's face, Shoyuta leans back to watch the emotions flicker across the boy's face. Kids sure can move through emotions fast. It doesn't matter, Izuku says. The glare Shoyuta shoots him has Izuku backtracking fast. I mean, I was only a couple years old when he left, Izuku begins. So I don't remember him. I'm mad that he's never come home to us, but I can't say that I miss him. You can't miss what you've never had. So I'm just mad for my mom's sake, even if she isn't mad because she loves him. But it is my responsibility to look after my mom because he isn't here. I'm all she has and that makes me the man of the house. So it is my job. Izuku whispers the last part angrily. Sighing, Shoyuta rubs the back of his neck. Izuku had a point, he wasn't wrong, but he wasn't entirely right. I want you to listen to me, Izuku, really listen. It's good that you feel that you have to look after your mom, there is nothing wrong with that. You are very responsible and mature. But you are only 15 years old. There is only so much you can do, only so much you should do. You have to let your mom deal with the absence of her husband on her own. She is the one supposed to be helping you deal with your father's absence. You are putting yourself through too much stress worrying about things you have no control over. You said it, you don't even remember going to the edge of the roof. What if that was your subconscious rebelling from the stress and looking for a way to end it? Both Shoyuta and Izuku shuddered at the thought. I don't know, kid. I'm not a psychologist. All I know is you are a teenager. You are going to a prestigious school that pushes you to your limit. You are training to be a hero, to survive. You have faced more villains than most third years. Had to learn how to control a self-destructive quirk, and deal with all the normal drama that comes with being a teenager. You have a habit of getting involved with other people's problems. That's a good quality for a hero, but you are not a hero yet. You are adding unnecessary stress on top of all your other stresses. Stop it, and just focus on yourself. Don't you ever stop and think about yourself? Shoyuta screeched internally. Shoyuta knows he's fixing to hit below the belt, but the safety and well-being of his student comes first. Your mom can take care of herself, that's what being an adult is about. She's fine on her own. You are not an adult, and are not responsible for her. You won't always live with her, like right now. You can't live your life fretting over everything that makes her sad. You'll drive yourself insane. Izuku tried to interrupt him. But you don't understand dash. Shoyuta cut him off. Then help me too. Help me to understand why you think you have to take care of your mom. Isn't she a capable adult? Yes. Then I don't see why you have to play grown-up. Izuku rubbed his face in frustration. I'm not. I just can't let her fret or get too sad. But people get sad, that's life. It's not like she's sad all the time. Besides, parents look after the children, not the other way around. You're gonna kill yourself from stress, and then your mom really will be alone. Does she even know how much this bothers you? How could she? I didn't even know he was upset. He smiles through everything. Smiles. Through everything. Does she know anything about what you feel, or do you just smile her worries away? By this point Izuku had curled in on himself. His sobs were shaking his body and he was close to hyperventilating. Shoyuta felt like he was missing something important. He was positive that Izuku wasn't telling him everything. But Shoyuta would figure it out. He wasn't going to let Izuku wiggle his way out of the truth. Whatever it was. All might is a bad influence. You can't just smile everything away. Shoyuta moved over to the couch and pulled the boy into his arms, rubbing soothing circles across the boy's back like Hizashi had always done for him. Shoyuta wasn't really sure how to comfort someone, but he could at least try. Shoyuta and Izuku sat on the couch together for a long time. Izuku was practically glued to Shuta's side. Shoyuta just kept holding him, whispering soothing words every now and then. At least he hoped they were soothing. It was obvious that the boy was exhausted from all of his crying. His eyelids were drooping and shoulders were slumping. Shoyuta needed to say one last thing before he let the boy sleep. He knows he had been blunt with Izuku, even a bit harsh, but the world could be a cruel place and it was his job to get the boy ready for it. So Shoyuta wasn't going to spare him. Already the boy had faced so much during his time at UA, and apparently had some secret demons. Pushing the boy to spill all his dark secrets too soon or too fast might be more damaging than helpful, but Shoyuta would get him to spill them eventually. So Shoyuta pulled the boy tight against his chest and rested his chin on Izuku's head. Izuku! He mumbled into the boy's hair. It took a moment before the boy replied. Yeah. His voice was raspy from crying. Shoyuta sighed before dropping one last bomb. Our conversation is over for now. We still have a lot to talk about. Not all at once, but I'm not letting go of the fact that someone told you to kill yourself. Shoyuta felt Izuku stiffen in his arms, and hugged the boy tighter. But I won't rush you. I want you to feel ready to tell me. To trust me enough to tell me. We will have to talk to your mom about how your father's absence is affecting you through her. And about being pressured to kill yourself. Izuku thought for a moment, which was hard because he was very tired, before he answered. But what if I never feel ready to talk about those things and the others? The others? As in there is more than just being told to commit suicide. Shoyuta had to bite his tongue to keep from growling. Too bad, he responded. He was feeling too stressed and emotional to respond nicely at this point. Thankfully Izuku didn't argue, just snuggled closer to Shoyuta and closed his eyes. There's a lot you don't know about Mr. Aizawa. Izuku murmured. Shoyuta quirked an eyebrow, even though the kid couldn't see it. You gonna tell me? He asked. Izuku yawned, and waited a minute before answering. I don't know. Shoyuta sighed and patted the greenette's back. Just consider it then. Izuku nodded his head against Shuta's chest. Eventually Izuku's breathing evened out, and was soon deeply asleep. Hefting Izuku into his arms bridal style and standing up from the couch, Shoyuta slowly made his way to his bedroom. Holy crap! What does this kid eat, bricks? Izuku was not as light as he looked. Shoyuta quickly deposited Izuku onto his bed, standing and leaning back enough to crack his back. I'm getting too old for this. After tucking the boy into the bed, Shoyuta grabbed a throw blanket that was folded at the end of his bed and made his way to the couch. Wrapping the blanket around his shoulders, he quickly face-planted onto the couch. His last thought before falling asleep was, problem child. Shoyuta couldn't remember the last time he had slept so hard. He remembers collapsing onto the couch, but anything after that was lost to him. Being a light sleeper, he can usually count the number of times he rolls over at night, but not last night. That must be a testament to how stressed the whole situation with Midoriya had left him. Honestly, just thinking about the problem child was reviving the stress from last night, and Shoyuta would give anything to fall back asleep for a few more hours. There was just one problem, and that problem was the insistent poking of his face. Shoyuta knew that poking. He has been living with that poking every morning for almost 2.5 months now. That poking was from a very little finger, from a very little girl. A very little girl named Eri. Shoyuta let out a long deep groan and buried his face deeper into the couch, something that would normally cause Eri to giggle and poke Shoyuta harder. She could be very insistent. This time his morning antics were met with silence. Turning his head in Eri's direction, Shoyuta cracked open one eyelid and looked into the concerned face of his foster daughter. Seeing her worried expression, Shoyuta pushed himself up and into a sitting position, stretching his arms over his head and causing multiple joints to pop and make very audible cracking sounds. I'm only 30. Am I supposed to make this much noise from moving? Shoyuta thought to himself. Eri had climbed up beside him at some point during his morning stretch, and was sitting quietly. Not uncommon, she could be a very quiet girl at times, years of fear and conditioning had made her that way, but normally she would be dragging poor Shoyuta into the kitchen by now. Demanding food. She was an early riser, and while she wasn't an overly cheerful morning person like an excessively loud, man-child cockatoo that he knew, she did demand her breakfast bright and early. Routine was important to victims of trauma, and having a sudden guest sleeping in Shuta's bed was probably throwing a wrench into that routine. She probably would be more upset if the guest wasn't Izuku, Deku. She has been glued to the boy since her rescue, and definitely saw him as an older brother. Shoyuta knew that her silence meant that she was waiting for an explanation from him. Sighing, Shoyuta stood and picked Eri up, carrying her into the kitchen and depositing her onto one of the 4 chairs that were placed around a small round table. We'll talk while I start breakfast. Shoyuta offered, walking over to the refrigerator to get the ingredients he needed to make omuris. While he worked he began talking. Izuku is dash. Shoyuta stopped. How was he supposed to explain this in a safe, non-triggering way for Eri to understand? Izuku wasn't necessarily suicidal, he hoped, but he was clearly depressed. How do you tell a child who has suffered so much that one of her heroes was probably only alive so as not to inconvenience or hurt his mother? Shoyuta was still trying to wrap his head around that. Deku is? The little girl prompted, unaware of her guardian's internal struggle. Shoyuta sighed and decided to take the most simple route of explanation. Izuku is really sad, I think, and he's been hiding it behind his smiles. So he won't worry anyone. Shoyuta said as he cracked eggs into the frying pan on the stove. Shoyuta waited, letting what he said to Eri sink in. She sat in silence for a few minutes while he finished their breakfast. The rice had already finished cooking in the rice cooker, just as he was finishing the 3 omelets. Shoyuta had a very large frying pan for cooking in. Hisashi tended to come eat over with them and had insisted that Shoyuta needed the large pan. He placed 2 filled plates down on the table, one in front of Eri and one in front of his seat. A 3rd plate was placed in the microwave for Izuku for when he woke up. Eri took a few bites of her omuris before asking Shoyuta, "Why is Deku sad?" Shoyuta swallowed the mouthful of his food and rubbed the back of his neck. Well, from what he told me last night, he's sad because his mom is sad. Seeing Eri about to ask another question, Probably about why his mom was sad, Shoyuta held up his hand to pause her question. They would get through this faster without having to stop for her to ask why after every question. Izuku said that his dad doesn't live with them anymore, and that makes his mom sad. Now Izuku isn't living with her anymore either, and it's making her even more sad. They have always been close, and I think her anxiety is affecting Izuku. By the way, anxiety triggers anxiety. It's a beach. Izuku thinks he has to fix it by taking care of her, but this isn't something that he can fix. It's something she has to come to terms with on her own. Do you understand so far? Shoyuta inquired. Eri nodded her head and asked, why doesn't Deku's dad live with them? Shoyuta took a few more bites of his food before he replied. Don't know. Izuku said his dad works far away, but doesn't visit or call. His loss. But Izuku needs to learn that he can't fix everything, and grown-ups are allowed to feel sad sometimes and have to deal with their problems themselves. Although, I don't think he's telling me everything. His Aizawa senses are tingling. Not that he would ever admit that. Eri nodded her head. Grown-up problems are hard. Kids should be kids. That's what Mirio says. Bless Mirio and his words of wisdom. I'm using that as an argument against Problem Child as soon as he wakes up. Shoyuta nodded his head in agreement. Izuku also mentioned that someone told him something very mean and hurtful, something no one deserves to be told. Now I'm worried if that was the only thing said to him, because it clearly affected him. Now I'm worried about his safety. More than I already am. Shoyuta thinks bitterly, shoveling more food into his mouth. Eri sets her fork down sharply and looks at Shoyuta with wide eyes. Her bottom lip trembles and her eyes get glassy, but she doesn't cry. She only cries when extremely distressed. Is Deku in danger? She whimpers. Shoyuta reaches across the table and runs his hand soothingly through her long silver hair a couple of times before retreating back across the table. He's never been great at comforting people, but no one can say he doesn't try, especially for her. I won't let anyone hurt Izuku, I promise. Shoyuta makes his voice as reassuring as possible, and Eri visibly relaxes. She trusts Shoyuta to take care of things. I have a pretty good idea on who the threat is, but I can't jump to conclusions. I need Izuku to tell me himself who told him to kill himself, along with whatever else the boy is hiding. But if I'm correct, then Izuku has been hurt by his bully while at UA. If I'm right, and I usually am, I will definitely put the fear into Bakugo Katsuki. Shoyuta thinks, clenching his fists under the table. Shoyuta does not tolerate bullying and will not let this go unchecked. Eri has finished with her breakfast and looks at Shoyuta with determination blazing in her eyes. Deku needs to talk to his mom. Shoyuta nods his head, agreeing with her. And you need to protect him from the person who hurt him. Shoyuta hums in acknowledgement. She wasn't wrong, and Shoyuta planned to do just that. He needs to move in with us. Eri states, like it's the most logical answer there is. Poor Shoyuta had just taken a sip of his drink when Eri announced the last part, so he understandably spit his drink across the room. Eri looks at him like he had just grown a second head, like she can't fathom why he would react this way. Coughing, he stands up and grabs the dish towel off of the counter and drops it on his impromptu spit take, mopping it up while trying not to cough a lung up. Once his airway is clear and the mess cleaned up, he turns to Eri. How did you come to that conclusion? He asks, voice raspy from coughing. Eri crosses her arms and gives Shoyuta a look that questions his intelligence. Like she couldn't fathom how he hadn't thought of it himself. Well, she begins, listing off on her fingers. You said Deku's dad isn't around. Someone is being mean to him. And he needs to learn how to just be a kid sometimes. Shoyuta nods, following along so far. Deku needs a dad to take care of him and teach him. You're doing that for me, so you can do it for him too. Should is stunned. And his heart did not do a little flip and flutter at Eri calling him a dad, her dad. No, it absolutely did not. Eri, Shoyuta begins, voice cracking. Curse emotions. Get back under the layers of sarcasm, attitude, indifference and weariness that I buried you under. I can't just take Izuku and claim him as my kid. I mean I can, it just might not be legal. He has a family, even if they are broken. He also lives right below us. Shoyuta adds. There is no reason to move him. I can protect and teach him just fine under our current living arrangements. I'm not going to be this kid's dad. I did not sign up for that. Although, depending on who the kid outs as his bully, those living arrangements might change. Eri hops down from her chair and glares at Shoyuta. She isn't even as tall as his hip, but her glare has him shutting his mouth in an instant. She means business. She marches her small self around the table and puts her hands on her hips, raising her chin in defiance. She spends too much time with Nemuri. Izuku lives with us or I go live with him. She states, stomping her foot. It's unreasonable, illogical, and such a childlike argument. Shoyuta stares, because there is no way his quiet little girl who is only just learning some self-confidence is throwing a tantrum. A tantrum for Izuku. So he stares and she glares back. This is too much. He knew how much Eri loved Izuku, but to think she would get this protective over him. To say he was shocked would be an understatement. Standing up against him for the sake of Turkey. He knows he won't win this argument, at least not right now. Shoyuta lowers his head to the table with a loud thump, causing the small girl to jump, startled. We can talk about me kidnapping Izuku after I have talked to him and gathered all the information I need. Deal? He asks, holding out his hand towards Eri. After some hesitation, she nods, grabbing his hand and giving it a firm shake. The determination is still in her eyes. Good. Now go wake up Sleeping Beauty. Shoyuta grumbles. Eri nods enthusiastically and rushes out of the kitchen. No doubt to poke Izuku awake like she does Shoyuta each morning. Cleaning away their dishes from the table, Shoyuta carries them over to the sink to begin washing and drying them. Shoyuta smiles to himself. Eri is very clearly planning on being difficult about this whole situation, but he can't find it in himself to be anything but pleased at how determined she is. He's obviously wrapped around her finger already. It makes his heart swell with how the broken little girl can still find it in herself to love others. And she clearly loves Izuku. A few minutes later, Izuku stumbles into the kitchen with Eri clutching his hand. Shoyuta didn't think it was possible for the boy to look worse than he did last night, but clearly he was wrong. There are tired lines under his eyes that are slightly bloodshot from crying. He looks haggard and not very awake. Shoyuta gives him credit for being able to function this early. Shoyuta was already downing the coffee that his coffee maker had brewed. It has a timer. Should is usually too lazy to make the effort in the morning to go about the process of cooking breakfast and make coffee. The coffee burns his throat as he takes a large swallow, finishing the coffee in record time. If there was a "how fast can you drink hot coffee" sport, Shoyuta would be a pro. As Eri pulls him over to the table and ushers him to sit down, Shoyuta grabs the plate out of the microwave, still hot, and puts it in front of Izuku. Izuku eats slowly, clearly in no mood for food this early, but unwilling to worry Eri any more than she already clearly is. She sits next to him, silently watching him. Shoyuta takes the moment of Izuku being distracted by food to observe him. Distracted is an understatement. The kid is barely responsive. But it is pretty early. His hair is a mess, pajamas rumpled and face pale. The kid obviously had a rough night, and Shoyuta wants to kick himself for having slept through it. Shoyuta pushes himself off of the counter that he had been leaned against and makes his way to his bedroom. Eri looks up at him, but stays seated beside Izuku. She's clearly curious as to what Shoyuta is doing, but is unwilling to leave Izuku's side. Izuku is less likely to try and make a break for it with Eri hanging onto him. Shout goes into his room and shuts the door behind him. He walks over to his desk and grabs his phone from where he had left it charging before all the trouble began. Unlocking it, he quickly calls the principal. After a few rings, Nedzu picks up. "Mr. Aizawa?" The mouse bear dog thing answers. "What a pleasant surprise. May I ask why you are calling so early in the morning? It is very unlike you." Shoyuta sits down at his desk and leans back in his chair. "I'm taking the day off. Along with Midoriya Izuku. Some worrying things have been brought to my attention. So I'm taking the day to get to the bottom of them." Shoyuta replies, rubbing his neck in frustration. "I need to stop that before I rub my neck raw. Nedzu is silent for a few moments before he speaks. How serious are we talking, Eraserhead? Some, easily handled. Others, very serious and not easily fixed. I'll inform you more once I have more details. I would appreciate it if you would inform All Might that Izuku is with me and that I would like him to keep his distance while I get to the bottom of things. His presence could just make things worse. The kid hates to disappoint or bother him. Also, could you ask Mike to come get Eri and take her to her tutor? Shoyuta asked. Nedzu hummed while he thought over what Shoyuta had said. Very well. I expect to be informed the moment you have all the information you need. I will inform the other teachers of Izuku's absence so they can reassure his classmates and make sure they don't meddle. Call it sick leave. And with that, the principal hung up the phone. This is the first time that I will have ever been absent from my teaching duties. Shoyuta thought, sighing. It had to be the problem child. After checking the time, 5:46 a.m., Shoyuta made his way back into the kitchen. No point in changing out of his sleepwear, black sweatpants and gray t-shirt, when he was just going to be sitting around the apartment all day, possibly being cried on. Izuku was still at the table, but was crying softly, his food forgotten. Eri was patting his back, telling him softly that everything would be okay. She was going to be his hero this time. Be still, my beating heart. That just caused the waterworks to increase, and Izuku pulled Eri onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was his lifeline. Shoyuta just stood by and watched, unwilling to interrupt their moment. After a few minutes, Izuku's crying began to slowly subside, and Shoyuta made his presence known by clearing his throat. Izuku stiffened and released his hold on Eri. She peered around Izuku's shoulder to look at Shoyuta. Shoyuta jerked his thumb in the direction of Eri's room. Go get dressed, Mike will be here shortly to take you to your lessons. Because she woke up so early, she had early lessons. He could see where Eri wanted to argue, so Shoyuta activated his quirk and stared down the little girl. No arguing. I still have things to talk to Izuku about, remember? Remembering the deal she had made with Shoyuta about talking to Izuku about staying with them, something Shoyuta had not agreed to. Not that it mattered to Eri, she got up from Izuku's lap and dashed to her bedroom to get dressed for the day. Shoyuta deactivated his quirk once she was out of his sight and walked over to Izuku and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. How about sitting in the living room while I clean up the kitchen? Shoyuta asked. Izuku just nodded, and shakily made his way to the living room. Shoyuta made quick work of cleaning Izuku's half-finished plate, and sat down at the table again, opting to give the boy some space for the moment. A rhythmic knocking at the door drew his attention and he quickly called out for them to come in. Mike for once didn't enter with his trademark enthusiasm and loud, yeah, shouted in English. He meekly walked over to Shoyuta, his brother in every way but blood. So, how's the little listener? Hizashi whispered, patting Shoyuta on the shoulder. He could see Izuku in the living room. Nedzu had filled him in on Izuku dealing with some problems, so Hizashi was a little worried. He always worries about his students, but when it comes to Midoriya, things tend to be a little extreme. Shoyuta leaned into the hand on his shoulder for a moment before brushing Hizashi's hand away and rubbed hands over his face. Kid is probably in shock this morning, he had a rough night. Eri was able to get a reaction out of him, although it was just him crying. How can someone cry so much? Shoyuta wasn't a crier, but that had a lot to do with his personality and the fact that he had dry eye. Hizashi snorted at the last part, but sobered up quickly. What happened? That dude is all sunshine and rainbows or self-sacrificing fierce determination. What's going on that you felt you had to get involved and take a day off? You never take days off. You came to school like a broken mummy, so what the hell is going on? Shoyuta glanced into the living room. Eri was dressed for the day and sitting with Izuku watching the morning news. Shoyuta doubted that Izuku had cut the TV on, so Eri must have done it to give Izuku something normal to focus on and help him relax. He was immensely proud of how observant and intelligent she was. Deciding that it was safe to speak freely, he motioned for Hizashi to come closer. Hizashi obliged, bending over so that his face was close to Shuta's. Zashi, the kid has been letting the fact that his mom is sad over his father's absence eat him up. His dad hasn't been around for years, But she must still be having a hard time. Can't really blame her. All Might says she's as sensitive as the kid. Being a single mother must be hard too. Brat has been probably trying too hard to make things easier for her. I found him sitting on the edge of the roof crying. I thought he was going to jump. He doesn't even remember going over there because he was so distraught and stressed over being separated from her on her anniversary. To make matters worse, he apparently has been told before to jump off a roof. Hizashi gasped and clenched his fists at his sides, glancing into the living room at Izuku before refocusing on Shoyuta. And the only reason he could give for never going that far is because he couldn't do that to his mother. Shoyuta took in a deep breath and continued. I'm seriously worried about what this boy has been holding in, what he's been through. He mentioned there was more than just suicide baiting. I'm almost afraid to find out what else problem child has been hiding. Hizashi essayed in a sharp breath and looked into the living room, eyes zeroing in on Izuku again. Protectiveness radiating off of him. Who could dare hurt the little green bean? Hell, Midoriya had been on patrol with him a month ago and Hizashi Shitsu not, a villain, stopped his fight because his couldn't hit an angel, because it was blasphemy and he didn't want to go to hell. So who the F told him to jump off the roof, and where can Hizashi find them? Hizashi nodded his head and whispered back. He doesn't leave this apartment until you get all the answers you need. Call in Tsukachi if you need undeniable proof that you are getting all the right info. Don't let Midoriya hold anything back. Shoyuta nodded in agreement. That was a rational course of action, but he would only use it as a last resort if he felt Izuku was keeping anything from him. He doubted the boy had it in him to be anything but truthful at the moment. Too stressed to fight Shuta's inquiries. Shoyuta stood and walked into the living room, Hizashi staying behind in the kitchen. He probably didn't want to stress Izuku out any more than he already was. Eri, Mix here to take you to tutoring. Get going. Blunt and to the point Aizawa. That's what he'll be known for. That and being kick butt. Eri nodded, hugging Izuku's arm before she got up and left with Hizashi. Shoyuta made his way over to Izuku and sat on the coffee table again, just as he had done last night. Grabbing the remote, he shut off the TV and focused his attention on the boy in front of him. Izuku was already crying again. If this kid doesn't die from villains or from stress, he's definitely going to die from dehydration from crying, Shoyuta thought wryly. Here's how this is going to go. I want to know everything. Everything that has been bothering you, every negative thing that has happened, been done or said to you. Everything. And you will answer all of my questions, and you will hold nothing back. If I for 1 second think you are withholding something, I will not hesitate in calling Detective Tsukachi and have him grill you. Izuku was a sobbing mess by the end of Shuta's speech. Tears pouring down his face, hiccuping and trying to catch his breath to no avail. Shoyuta waited. He was not going to rush this, and he also needed to be able to understand the boy, and he doubted he would be able to in the state Izuku was in at the moment. So he waited. It took a while for Izuku to cry himself out, and a little while longer before Shoyuta was convinced he would be able to talk properly. All right, kid. I know you don't want this, but it has to be done. As an afterthought, Shoyuta added, if Eri could tell us everything that had happened to her, then you should be able to also. Izuku nodded but didn't move his gaze away from the floor. Shoyuta noticed this and relented, you don't have to look at me if that helps. Izuku nodded and after taking a deep breath, he began speaking, knowing it was futile to try and fight Shoyuta. He was also afraid to try. So he gathered his courage and started. He started from the beginning about how he noticed the other kids had dads and he didn't. How at first his dad called every week but eventually stopped to only once or twice a month. How he saw that his mom missed his dad, but was happy to get any calls from the man, no matter how brief. How the doctors declared him quirkless, which was why his dad had stopped calling. When he asked his mother if he could still be a hero, his mother could only cry over him and apologize. She didn't believe in him. It made him feel as if he had been told that he had a terminal illness with no cure. His mother almost acted if it was. He received no support from his mother when it came to his dream of being a hero, and that she treated him as something fragile. He could understand her need to protect him, but it still hurt, and felt a bit excessive. Excessive? How Bakugu, Kaken, his childhood friend began bullying him, naming him Deku or useless after misinterpreting the kanji in his name. He never gave up on his dream, despite his lack of support, and Bakugo actively trying to crush his dream. Bakugo saw it as Izuku thinking he was better than him, and lashed out, attacking him with not only his word, but also his quirk. Shoyuta dug his nails into his palms, grounding himself so as not to go hunting down the explosive teen and having him read the entire quirk's code of conduct and laws and regulations, before beating him over the head with the very large and heavy book. He described how his teachers turned a blind eye to Izuku's torment, seeing as he was at the bottom of the pecking order or below it, not worth protecting. It's not like he would ever be anyone important. Fing discrimination. How his classmates ignored him like a pariah, out of general dislike for him or for fear of what Bakugo would do if they tried to befriend him. Others bullied him alongside Bakugo. Some worse than others. He admitted to not having a single friend since he was 5 years old, and only made friends once he entered UA. Izuku then tells how after the teacher unhelpfully mentioned his goal of attending UA one day, Bakugo and 2 of his followers had cornered him in the classroom after everyone had left. How Bakugo had singed his uniform and tried to destroy his hero analyses notebook, throwing it out the window and into a pond, telling Izuku that there was a way for him to get a quirk. Shoyuta felt his stomach drop. He knows where this is going. Pray for a quirk in the next life and take a swan dive off the roof. Yep, I'm going to kill Bakugo. The hero life was nice while it lasted. Izuku then breaks Shuta's heart even more by telling him that after leaving the school he was attacked by the sludge villain. How much bad luck can one kid have in a single day? How All Might had saved him, then told him he couldn't be a hero without a quirk and left him on a roof. Shota wants to kill All Might. How could he crush a child's dreams without giving him a chance to prove himself? Without knowing anything about him. Children have fragile hearts. One wrong move could push them in the wrong direction. And he left him on a roof. Sure, Shoyuta expels kids left and right, but at least he gives them a chance. A chance to prove they are taking things seriously, that they can think outside the box. That they can adapt. That they might not get killed right off the bat once they graduate. All Might had dismissed the kid without a second thought or backwards glance. Izuku says it crossed his mind for a moment that jumping wouldn't be so bad. But that moment was brief, and he would rather go on living. Even if it was with a broken heart and dream. Shoyuta really wants to throw up. To think he came close, if only for a moment, to losing one of his brightest and most determined students. And he would have never known. Would have never known what he was missing out on. How many of his students would have died if it wasn't for Izuku being there? That on his way home, he accidentally made his way to another villain attack, where wouldn't you know it, the sludge villain had escaped and had Bakugo as a hostage. Trying to kill him and use as a meat suit, just like he had tried to do to Izuku earlier. Shoyuta knew that Izuku and Bakugo had been involved in a villain attack. He just didn't know the exact details, or much about the villain. The information wasn't mentioned in the news, and Shoyuta had never thought to ask the police for the file on the villain or the attack. He should have. It sounded awful and traumatizing. Izuku describes how he moved without thinking and ran to his childhood friend's aid, only to get rescued again by All Might. Then scolded by the other heroes, who had stood by and done nothing to save Bakugo because their quirks were unfit for the job. What is the hero society coming to when pros stand by and do nothing and a child has to try and save the day? Then on his way home, his quirk appeared after 14 years, and All Might, who had been looking for him to apologize, came to his rescue a third time, and offered to train him due to their similar quirks. Shoyuta can tell the last part is a lie, but doesn't call Izuku out on it. It's none of his business how his quirk appeared. It's obvious to him that this is a secret between Izuku and All Might, and it's not something he plans on getting involved in. Yet. After a few minutes, Shoyuta realizes that Izuku is finished. He hasn't looked up once, and Shoyuta is thankful for that. Over the years Shoyuta had mastered the art of poker face, but he can only imagine the looks that most definitely crossed his face while Izuku told his story. And he is so glad that he was trusted by Izuku with this story, but he is also extremely horrified. Years of no one supporting or believing in this brilliant boy. And Izuku was obviously brilliant, although a bit stupid and hard-headed. To think no one, not even his own mother, saw his potential. Quirk or no quirk, this child could have been cultivated to be more of a force to be reckoned with than he already was. Shoyuta had snuck and read his journal. He was observant. He could gather so much information on a person's quirk and fighting style by watching them for only a few moments. How had no one seen how talented he was? Even Nedzu was interested in strengthening his analysis. Also in teaching the boy code, because his journals were dangerous. But what really made his blood boil was the fact that Izuku had been bullied and abused by his childhood friend his entire life and no one stepped in to stop it. Izuku clearly was a master at deceiving his mother and hiding his suffering from her. That's the only reason he didn't march down to Izuku's old apartment and demand to know why she had let something like that go on. You can't blame someone who was being kept in the dark. But the teachers had no excuse. The other students who stood by and did nothing to stop it or report it had no excuse. Izuku was fidgeting on the couch, alternating between looking at the floor or anywhere that wasn't Shoyuta. His teacher's quiet rage was radiating off of him, and Izuku could feel it. He wanted to make a run for it, unsure if his teacher was mad at him for being so weak, or the rest of the world. The only thing that kept him rooted to his seat was the knowledge that his teacher could catch him in an instant. Bakugo Katsuki has no excuse. Shoyuta was not going to let Bakugo's past crimes go unpunished. And that's what they were, crimes. The use of a quirk in public against another person, without a license, was against the law. Using his quirk to beat another person into SB and for his own satisfaction was against the law. Minor or not. These laws were taught since elementary school. It's not like he didn't know them. Bakugo had clearly changed his ways, and had somewhat made up with Izuku after a brutal, past-curfew fight, and was well on his way to being a hero. He would one day make a great one, attitude and all. But hopefully without as much of the attitude. But his past actions were villainous, and he was going to be held accountable for them. Maybe not to the full extent of the law, but he wasn't going to be let off the hook scot-free. Shoyuta needed to address this, to prevent Bakugo's ego from becoming his downfall, and to make sure he never treated anyone like that again. Shoyuta felt that there was more that Izuku wasn't telling him. Years of undercover work with the vigilantes and interrogating villains had left him with a sense for these things. After enough years as a hero, you develop a sort of instinct and gut feeling. It has yet to let him down. Even the law recognizes these instincts. They had to after the millionth time of a hero explaining that the only reason they knew to go to a location, grab a suspicious person, or just suddenly prepare for a fight was because of a gut feeling. It was an accepted reason for many heroes' actions. The police couldn't deny the accuracy. Not every hero had it, but the ones who had been in the business long enough or had fought enough had it. He wanted to know what Izuku was holding back, but decided not to push for it yet. Izuku had just thrown out a lot of sensitive information. He needed a breather. Not Shoyuta digging for more information. Nothing screamed at him that the information was life-threatening, just very important. So Shoyuta could hold out for a while longer. So for now, he needed to let the boy in front of him know just how special he was. How much Shoyuta believed in him. And that according to Eri, was now a part of their family and had a home with them. After everything Izuku had just admitted, he couldn't help but agree with her. Izuku was a problem child, and was now his problem child. The least he could do was to give Izuku a safe place while everything was dealt with. A place where Shoyuta could keep an eye on him. The days ahead were going to be rough, seeing as Shoyuta had plans to make that would disturb the little bit of peace that his class had found. Shoyuta needed to keep Izuku away from that, and take the proper steps into getting Izuku the help that he needed. Shoyuta brushed his hair out of his face and looked at the boy in front of him. Izuku looked like a frightened bird. Like one wrong move or word would spook him into flight. The man was a little concerned about Izuku's mom. He knows that kids can get good at hiding things from their parents. He sure as hell had been. But if Bakugo was actively using his quirk against Izuku, then how had she not noticed? Had she noticed that Izuku had no friends? Had she been bothered by it? Well, even if it did bother her, there wasn't anything she could do. You can't make kids be friends with your son. And unfortunately, It was something that just happened to some kids. Some kids just didn't make friends. Or want them. Shoyuta has a deep suspicion that it want just his teachers that were dismissive of the boy. If he had been quirkless so long, then there were probably other adults in his life that didn't treat Izuku well. He would have to look into that. Those teachers at least deserve to have their teaching licenses revoked. Shoyuta moved to sit beside Izuku on the couch and once again pulled the boy into his arms, squishing the boy into his side. The tears that Izuku had been holding back burst forth, and he was a sobbing mess all over again. Shoyuta slowly rocked them from side to side, arms wrapped tightly around the boy, holding him with all the parental strength he could muster. He pressed his face into Izuku's unruly curls and whispered, "I won't let anyone hurt you like that ever again. I believe in you, and I won't leave you like your father did. You'll get into too much trouble if I did. I get the feeling that you're stuck with me, or I'm stuck with you. So you have Eri and me to support you now." Shoyuta squeezes Izuku tighter to his chest, and adds sarcastically, "Welcome to the Aizawa family." To his surprise, Izuku giggles, clinging tightly to him and whispers back, "I know, Eri told me what she told you." That sneaky little brat. Shoyuta thinks fondly, and lets out a laugh of his own. Eri was one determined little girl. She completely bypassed Shoyuta and went right to Izuku with her plan. Clever girl. Shoyuta knows that he'll have to inform Nezu about all of this, steps will have to be taken, punishments doled out, phone calls made. But for now he lets himself hold his problem child, and will worry about everything later. Possibly after a nap. Yeah, he and Izuku deserve a nice long nap. Shoyuta and Izuku had eventually fallen back asleep on the worn leather couch. Izuku was practically draped across him, and Shoyuta was sprawled awkwardly with his legs hanging off the side of the couch. Izuku had his face pressed deeply into the crook of Shuta's neck and his fists were clenching Shuta's shirt. He was deeply asleep. Maybe a good long nap will bring the color back into his face and get rid of those awful eye bags. Shoyuta thought to himself. Shoyuta knew he hadn't been napping long, but hoped the boy would get another hour or two of sleep. He didn't mind being a human body pillow. Hizashi had fallen asleep on him more times than he could count, but he seriously needed to pee and he couldn't put off his responsibilities any longer. So as carefully as he could, Shoyuta rolled himself and Izuku onto their sides, reversing their position enough for Shoyuta to pry Izuku's hands loose and carefully get up and off the couch. Once he was free, Shoyuta quickly made his way to the bathroom to relieve his bladder. Thankfully, long grueling hours of undercover hero work with few restroom breaks had given Shoyuta great control over his bladder and how long he could hold it, which Shoyuta was thankful for at the moment, because he was about to burst. After his bladder was empty and he had brushed his teeth, brush his hair? Hell no. That was a hassle only Hizashi and Nemuri had the patience to deal with. He ambled to the kitchen, only sparing Izuku a glance to confirm that the boy was still asleep. Sprawled across the couch on his back and drooling slightly. Shoyuta had only 1 cup of coffee this morning, an unintentional blasphemy that he intended to correct. 2 cups of coffee in the morning was his usual routine, sometimes 3. He set the coffee maker to brew his favorite blend of coffee, a brand that was very strong and not recommended to weaker coffee drinkers. Hizashi called it heart attack-inducing black poison, after trying a sip of it one time. 1 fing sip. Shoyuta had warned him that it was potent, but Hizashi's curiosity was unstoppable. So to everyone's dismay, including Hizashi's, the loud voice hero had been hit with the caffeine full force. He was more hyperactive than usual and had not stopped talking the entire day. His speed talking could rival Izuku's mumbling, especially in volume. Everyone was traumatized, and at the end of the day, Nemuri had had enough and used her quirk to put Hizashi to sleep until the caffeine overdose ended. Hizashi never drank Shuta's coffee again after that. Everyone had looked at Shoyuta in horror for almost a week afterwards, unable to believe that not only did he drink this coffee that comes with a warning label but that he could actually take a nap while under its influence. Shoyuta had been drinking it for years, so its effect on him had weakened. Not that it had affected him much to begin with. Shoyuta sat at the kitchen table, coffee in one hand and his cell phone in the other. He had to let Nezu and the other teachers know what he had discovered. Nedzu was the first and most important person to be informed, so he pulled up his email and sent a detailed list of what he had been told. To Nedzu Principal. From Aizawa Shoyuta. Subject: Midoriya Izuku. Here's what I found out so far. I have a feeling that the kid is withholding something from me. But I don't get the feeling that it is life-threatening, so I'm going to let it slide for now and see if I can eventually get him to fess up. Was quirkless until the age of 14. No support from mother over desire to be a hero. We both know he would make a formidable analysis hero. Possibly overprotected or coddled by his mother. Not my preferred style of parenting, but whatever. Father overseas for work. Hasn't seen his father since he was small. Stopped communicating when Izuku was deemed quirkless. Mother is upset over the matter with her husband. Izuku is troubled by her distress. Doesn't let her know it upsets him from what I gathered. Kid doesn't seem to like bothering people with his problems or feelings. Wouldn't put it past him to blame himself for his father's absence and his mother's unhappiness. Was intensely bullied by peers and Bakugo Katsuki all of his life. Teachers did nothing to prevent it and turned a blind eye. Mother was kept in the dark on his bullying. I don't know how she could have missed it. It sounds like Izuku came home with at least some injuries. Was told to commit suicide by Bakugo in middle school in the hopes of gaining a quirk in the next life. Gained a quirk at 14 and was trained by All Might. This part seems fishy to me. I can tell the kid is lying about something, but you know more about All Might on a personal level than I do. I want this to be handled discreetly. While I would prefer to handle this matter myself in my own way, I understand if you feel I am too involved to make appropriate decisions. I don't think I would be irrational, but I do feel very strongly about this, and we both know how my temper can get. I plan to give the other teachers a less detailed explanation and will omit Bakugo's name for now. Please reply quickly. Sincerely, Aizawa. Shoyuta reread his email before sending it. He got up and fixed himself a cup of coffee, black as tar, and sat back down at the table, sipping his coffee slower than he had this morning. He opened up the teachers' group chat on his phone to give the teachers more of a heads up than what Nedzu had probably told them. Teachers of Disasters group chat. Aizawa is online. Aizawa, I have disturbing information regarding Midoriya. Loud Kakatuya is online. Loud Kakatuya, spill. Loud Kakatuya. I mean, I already know most of it. But if you got new deets then spill. Midnight Madness is online. Loud Kakatuya, Green Bean Hero Protection Team Unite. Midnight Madness, Hizashi? Really? Is that really your username? How is the little green bean show? Midnight Madness, does he need a cuddle? Midnight Madness, does he need a chest to lay his head on? Snipe, Blood King, All Might and 3 others are online. Midnight Madness, BC I have a BRST. Midnight Madness, chest. Midnight Madness, chest. I have a chest. Snipe, don't act like you meant anything other than BRST. Snipe, you know you love squishing people between your hooters. Aizawa, can you all FING focus? Midnight Madness, sorry dad. Snipe, sorry pops. Aizawa, all of you. All Might is typing. Aizawa, All Might just stop. Aizawa, USCK at texting. So just stop. Aizawa, I'll discuss this with you in more detail later. After school hours. So log off. Loud Kakatuya, oh. All Might, Aizawa I would like to be informed on my student just like the others. All Might, Enviarmandi. Nzu would like to speak to me. All Might is offline. Midnight Madness, Asvishko. Blood King, Midnight Ixi, has stopped working. Midnight Madness, oh yeah. Midnight Madness, Shoyuta? Midnight Madness, the green bean? Aizawa is typing. Snipe, what's wrong with the lil rascal? Loud Kakatuya, Shoyuta is it worse than what you told me this morning? Loud Kakatuya, Suda. Loud Kakatuya, is it? Snipe? Midnight Madness, Hizashi let the man type. Shoyuta sighed, sipping his coffee. Texting these assholes was a pain. Aizawa, so. Aizawa, Midoriya is stressing over his mom being alone now that he is living in the dorms. She misses her husband. Can't imagine why. Midnight Madness, Chill Shoyuta. Loud Kakatuya, point shoulda. Aizawa, Hizashi. Aizawa, don't rush me. Aizawa, the man hasn't been in their lives since Izuku was small. Aizawa, dropped almost all contact when he was dears, thought he was quirkless. Didn't get one till he was bullied since 5, no friends till high school. Loud Kakatuya, my poor baby. Snipe, does he like hats? Snipe, gonna get him a cowboy hat. Aizawa, told to jump off roof in middle school. Midnight Madness, fucking what? Snipe, what some bitches said that to him? Snipe, gonna go yeehaw on their buttes? Midnight Madness, the F is going yeehaw on their buttes? Shoyuta could just hear Hizashi's voice in the distance screaming, what the actual F dash? What motherfucking piece of shit said that? I'll fight their beach butt. The dorms were a good distance away from the school. Hizashi was at the school, which meant that Hizashi was cursing while using his quirk. Inside the school. Poor kids. Aizawa, shut the F up before you wake problem child. Midnight Madness, on it. Blood King, on it. After a few seconds, the cursing stopped. Loud Kakatuya, sorry. I just couldn't hold it in. Loud Kakatuya, that like hurt my soul. Midnight Madness, who would treat that angel like that? He is nothing but kind and helpful. Loud Kakatuya, that baby stepped on an ant and apologized. Loud Kakatuya, too pure. Blood King, quirk discrimination at its worst if you ask me. Blood King, only reason I can see why anyone would attack the kid. Midnight Madness, that's not a good reason. That shouldn't be a reason. Loud Kakatuya, word. Blood King, didn't say it was a good reason. There is never a good reason for that sheet. Aizawa, going to find out more soon. Hopefully. Aizawa, Hizashi, same. But got to hold it together for the kid. Also maybe you could talk to him after school? You are better when it comes to dealing with feelings. And I'm reaching my limit on how nice I can be. Need an emotional break. Midnight Madness. Oh. If you two weren't practically brothers I would ship you. Snipe. Gagging noises, you know your dirty mind ships them anyway. Brick by brick. What is ship? Loud Kakatuya. Ishiyama been lurking. Loud Kakatuya. The elusive Cementos has come out of hiding. Loud Kakatuya. Shoyuta. Quick. Use capture. Shoyuta rolled his eyes. He was about to respond when he heard Izuku move around some, then yawn. Aizawa. GTG kid is waking up. Aizawa is offline. Shoyuta got up and made his way into the living room at the first sounds that Izuku was beginning to wake up. Izuku was in the process of stretching, still laying on his back on the couch, and had his eyes closed. Sipping the last bit of his coffee, he waited for the boy to become aware of his surroundings. Shoyuta watched as Izuku slowly blinked his eyes open, like a cat would, propping himself up on his arms. Izuku lazily looked around the room until his eyes landed on Shoyuta. A blush quickly spread across his face, realizing that he had fallen asleep in his teacher's arms for a second time in less than 24 hours. The blush was short-lived and his face rapidly began to pale. Shoyuta watched in alarm as the boy's face went from bright red to sickly pale in a matter of seconds. His eyes were wide and his pupils were dilated. He seemed to be on the verge of a panic attack. Before Shoyuta could move towards him, Izuku shot up off the couch and dashed into the bathroom. Shoyuta placed his empty coffee cup on the table and rushed after him, only to be met with the sounds of Izuku throwing up his little bit of breakfast into the toilet. Dimen panic attacks. Shoyuta bypassed the boy hanging onto the toilet, dry heaving once he had thrown up everything he had eaten along with some stomach acid. Grabbed a washcloth from a drawer under the sink and quickly wet it with cold water, wringing it out before he made his way back to the boy. Shoyuta crouched down and placed the cold cloth on the back of Izuku's neck. Having a cold cloth pressed on the neck or face was one of the many ways to slow an anxiety attack. He's not sure why, just that it works. Hey, it's okay. You're okay, Shoyuta said calmly, holding the washcloth to the boy's neck with one hand, while rubbing soothing circles between his shoulders with his other hand. You're fine. I promise. I know this has been too much too fast. But everything will be fine. Trust me. Izuku was leaning over the toilet, breathing erratically. Skiing in short, sharp breaths. Close to hyperventilating. Cold not working. New plan. Shoyuta sat down behind Izu, foregoing rubbing his back in preference to pulling the boy's back to his chest and circling his arms around him. Holding him tightly. Holding the kid seems to be becoming a habit. Breath with me. Shoyuta instructed, taking a deep breath and holding it before slowly releasing it. He did this repeatedly until he felt Izuku shakily trying to mimic him. It took a while before they were both breathing deeply, in sync with each other. This was a mild and short panic attack, and Shoyuta was grateful for that. Sure, the kid had thrown up from panic, but at least it was over almost as quickly as it came. He didn't know if he could deal with a longer one. Shoyuta sat with Izuku for a while, both males just focusing on breathing. Shoyuta was still holding Izuku to his chest with one arm, while he ran his hand through the boy's hair with the other. That seemed to calm the teen even more, and he could feel Izuku relaxing against his chest. I'll have to remember that petting his hair calms him down quickly. What is he, a kitten? Once Shoyuta was sure that Izuku was calmer and on the last legs of his panic attack, he pulled the boy to his feet and walked him out of the bathroom. Deciding that they had one too many fall-apart sessions in the living room, Shoyuta pulled Izuku along to his bedroom. Shoyuta left Izuku to stand by the bed while he rummaged around in his closet. I should probably organize this mess. Finally finding his spare sleeping bag among the mess, he pulled it from the closet. After giving it a few quick shakes to air it out, he tossed it onto the bed next to Izuku. Izuku flinched away from it, looking at the yellow sleeping bag with wide eyes. Does he think it has demonic powers or something? Get in, Shoyuta ordered. The absolutely shocked look on Izuku's face was hilarious, and Shoyuta had to keep himself from snorting. Izuku started to protest, but Shoyuta just crossed his arms and glared the boy into SBMs. The sleeping bag always brought Shoyuta a sense of calm, being safely enveloped in its warmth, cocooned away from the world. He could only hope that Izuku would be able to feel the same security and safety too. It was a hunch, but the way the boy would relax when being held gave Shoyuta a reason to believe that it would have a similar effect. Izuku slowly and awkwardly climbed into the sleeping bag on the bed and zipped himself up, an embarrassed blush dusting his cheeks. As far as anyone knew, Shoyuta never shared his sleeping bag. Which was almost true. Until Eri came along, Hizashi had been the only one to ever have the honor of curling up in the yellow monstrosity. It was usually after the blonde man had some terrifying encounter with a bug, and Shoyuta would wrap him up in the bag's safety while he eliminated the vile bug. Eri, on the other hand, crawled into the sleeping bag whenever she discovered Shoyuta in it. Or Shoyuta would wrap it around her after she had a nightmare. Do you know why you just had a panic attack? Shoyuta asked. Izuku nodded his head and whispered hoarsely, remembered telling you everything and panicked. Shoyuta nodded his head and flopped down onto the floor, leaning his back up against the closet door, giving Izuku a few minutes to calm himself. Just chill over there for a while and relax, Shoyuta ordered. Panic attacks were stressful and tiring. He reached over to his bedside table and grabbed a hair tie, pulling his hair up into a loose bun before settling back down against the door. While he waited for Izuku to relax more, he felt the soft vibrations from his phone and took it out of his pocket to check it. Nedzu had replied to his email. Looking up, he glanced at Izuku, who was watching him, worrying his bottom lip between his teeth. Probably nervous about what the vibration of his phone meant. It's just a report from my agency that I need to read over. Shoyuta lied smoothly. It was a logical ruse to keep the boy from having another panic attack. He doesn't need to know it's about him. While I'm reading, I want you to count backwards from 300, slowly and out loud. Counting was a good way to calm oneself and was a good distraction. Shoyuta used this technique a lot when dealing with his hell class. Izuku nodded his head and began to softly count backwards. Satisfied that the boy was distracted with counting and not thinking about the phone, Shoyuta opened the email and began to read. To Aizawa Shoyuta. From Nedzu, UA Principal. Subject: Midoriya Izuku. Aizawa, thank you for the information. I can only imagine how stressed Midoriya must be at the moment. I am very disappointed in the fact that Bakugo Katsuki acted this way, and rest assured that his actions will not go unpunished. I will allow you to set the guidelines of how this should be handled, Given that you are the homeroom teacher and dorm master for both boys, and you have the most experience with them, you have always been strict but fair, and I have no doubt that you will handle this accordingly. As for confronting the issue yourself, I believe that it would be best left to All Might to handle. I do not doubt your ability to control yourself despite your temper, and I know that both you and All Might are almost equally invested in the boys. However, I feel that having All Might reprimand Bakugo will have more effect, having been an influence in his life longer than you. Not that I don't believe Bakugo respects you, I just feel having All Might reprimand him will hurt his pride more. Having his all-time favorite hero punish him will hopefully have that desired effect. I do wish for you to confront Mrs. Midoriya yourself. When I suggested that All Might do so, he seemed to be nervous. Something about how she had very nearly pulled Izuku for Yue's failures at keeping her son safe, and how he couldn't stand to face her with another failure. I tried to reason that he wasn't at fault for something that happened before he met Midoriya, but it fell on deaf ears. So I leave that to you. I would suggest doing so tomorrow, that is when I have planned for Bakugo's parents to be fought in to address the situation. Yours sincerely, Netsu. Shoyuta read the email quickly, glancing up under his eyelashes every so often to make sure the problem child wasn't paying him too much attention. He trusted All Might to handle this. The man may be a blundering idiot when it came to teaching, but not when it came to justice and protecting those in need. Especially when it was Izuku in need. A disappointed and angry All Might was enough to make any student fall apart, no matter how tough and prideful they were. Bakugo's ego wouldn't stand a chance. Shoyuta quickly typed out his reply so he could return his attention to Izuku, who was down to 2. Netsu, Ue Principal. From Aizawa Shoyuta. Subject: punishment. This will go on Bakugo's school record, and he will receive a mark on his hero license. He will be suspended for 2 weeks, and on house arrest at home with his family. He will have to attend mandatory anger management classes and emotional therapy in order to continue being a UA student. If he doesn't cooperate, he will be expelled. This is required until he graduates. He will not be allowed to sit next to Midoriya during classes, and until he has permission from his therapists, he will not directly work in hero training alongside Midoriya. He can still participate, just not with or near Midoriya. I will not have another event like with All Might's heroes versus villains. They will be kept separate until the therapists and I am convinced that he is not a threat to Midoriya, and until the Midoriya gives his consent for Bakugo to be a part of his life again. We both know that Midoriya will accept Bakugo back with open arms. I want a handwritten apology from Bakugo to Midoriya before his suspension is up. I want Tsukachi to be present during Bakugo's meeting. I don't think Bakugo will lie, but better safe than sorry. I don't want Bakugo trying to warp things to make himself not look like the perpetrator. Midoriya and I will not return to classes until Monday to allow for Midoriya to recover emotionally. He seems very sensitive at the moment. Or at least more sensitive than usual. Midoriya will also be receiving therapy for mental and physical abuse. Midoriya will be moving in with me. So a small house on campus would be greatly appreciated. I don't believe it will be beneficial for the 2 boys to be under the same roof. It will also allow Midoriya some privacy once it is revealed to the students the reason behind their classmates' absences. Not in full detail, but the gist of it. I don't want to risk the class turning against Bakugo. And the last thing we need is a class civil war with the Baku squad against the Deku squad. I am going to ban Midoriya from using his phone for a few days, so please inform his classmates not to try and contact him. I doubt they will listen. Sincerely, Aizawa. Finished with his email, Shoyuta sent it to the principal and pocketed his phone. Izuku was currently on. Shoyuta cleared his throat to get the boy's attention. You can stop now. The boy sighed in relief, clearly tired of counting. He did look more relaxed than earlier, clearly the sleeping bag was working its magic. Shoyuta stood up from the floor, leaning backwards a bit to crack his back. When Shoyuta finished, Izuku's wide-eyed stare was clearly he had heard all the popping sounds Shuta's back had made. Shoyuta jutted his jaw forward, ping one eyebrow and giving Izuku his best haughty look. He grumbled, "Don't look at me like that, Mr. Breaks his bones like it's his job. You'll sound like me one day too, if you don't already. You also have more scars than me, a 31-year-old, who's been an underground hero for almost 13 years. You have been in the hero course student for almost 1 year and have broken your arms and legs multiple times and have scars littering your body. You have no room to gawk at me. Shoyuta stalked out of the room after seeing Izuku's indignant expression. The loud thump from the bedroom was probably Izuku trying to rush after Shoyuta without removing the sleeping bag first. Shoyuta snorted, ignoring the fact that he had done that plenty of times himself. Shoyuta ignored the soft sheet he heard come from Izuku, followed by the rustling of the sleeping bag being removed and the quick sounds of Izuku running barefoot after him. "You'll catch a cold walking around barefoot," Shoyuta scolded him. He himself had on a pair of dark gray socks that may or may not have pink cat paw prints on the bottoms. Izuku merely hummed in response to this as they made their way into the kitchen. Izuku quickly sat down at the table, not wanting to be underfoot. Shoyuta set to work making a filling lunch for them both to enjoy, seeing how Izuku had puked up his breakfast. "You Mr. Aizawa?" Izuku called softly. Shoyuta didn't turn around from his task, but hummed to show that he was listening. "What happens now?" he asked. Shoyuta could hear just the hint of panic in his voice. Not wanting Izuku to work himself into another panic, Shoyuta decided to lighten the mood before they delved into the topic. So, stopping what he was doing, Shoyuta spun around with his widest and wildest grin and answered, "We're going to throw Bakugo into a volcano as an overly angry version sacrifice." Izuku's horrified expression at seeing Shuta's grin slowly morphed into one of pure delight as he doubled over and was completely overtaken by a fit of giggles. He had tears in his eyes and could barely catch his breath. Good to know that the kid doesn't have any problem trolling the explosive brat. Satisfied, Shoyuta returned to his task, letting his manic grin turn softer and more fond. "Finally, something good. I've been feeling like I just keep stressing the kid out, without any sign of there being a light at the end of the tunnel." Izuku's giggling fit ended just as Shoyuta was finishing up their lunch. It wasn't anything fancy, rice and leftover miso soup from yesterday's dinner. He placed Izuku's bowls in front of him, then gathered his own and sat down on the opposite side of the table facing the boy. They quietly ate for a few minutes, no one ready to disturb the peaceful and somewhat happy bubble Shuta's joke had created. But all good. Things must come to an end, so he set his utensils aside and rubbed the back of his neck. "Kid, we're going to go talk to your mother tomorrow about everything. But that's for the you of tomorrow to worry about. Right now I want you to listen to some things I have to say." Shoyuta waited for Izuku to respond. He was glad to notice the boy had almost finished all of his rice and half of his soup. Setting his utensils down too, Izuku nodded his head and whispered his okay. "Bakugo's not being expelled." Shoyuta began. Izuku relaxed as if a weight had been lifted off of his shoulders. "Of course the brat is worried about Bakugo," Shoyuta realized, hiding his irritation behind taking a sip of his drink. After he set his glass down, he continued. "All Might and Netsu will be holding a meeting with him and his parents tomorrow, which is why we will be going to speak with your mother. I'll call her later to let her know we will be paying her a visit. I'm not going to discuss with you what Bakugo's meeting will hold. Just know that he is being punished, though not as severely as he could be. With the league having shown an interest in him, his determination and his potential, I'm unwilling to expel him. That doesn't mean I won't, if he refuses to acknowledge his mistakes and take the steps to fix them. It is also going to take a lot of effort and time to get back in my good graces." Izuku nodded his head and fiddled with his fingers. That was more than anything his teachers had ever done. He can't say he was surprised by Mr. Aizawa's decision, but he was worried that his teacher might be being a little too harsh. After all, Kaken had so much potential, he just had a hard time expressing his emotions and controlling his anger. That, along with his quirk, just made him a bomb with a short fuse. It wasn't something he could really help. Izuku had learned over the years how best to avoid setting him off or how to avoid him altogether. He had also mellowed out some after entering UA and discovering he was no longer the top dog. No one knew Kaken like he knew him. He didn't really mean the insults and threats he said most of the time, it was just his automatic reaction. Kaken just didn't have a filter and rarely thought before he spoke. Maybe he could get his phone and send a text explaining this to All Might and plead for him to be lenient with Kaken. After all, Kaken looked up to All Might as much as Izuku did. Maybe, Izuku! Shuda's shout drew Izuku out of the muttering spell he had fallen into. Shoyuda sighed. He wanted to go bury himself in his bed and ignore all his responsibilities for a year. You are not texting All Might, Shoyuda said, glaring at the boy in front of him. Said boy let out a huff and looked away, glaring at the floor. Well, hello, attitude. Shoyuda was impressed that Izuku had the nerve to huff at him, but given the fact that Izuku had cried all over him, fallen asleep on him, and thrown up in front of him, a little sass wasn't too unexpected. The boy was stressed to the max, so a little sass was warranted. He also knew that the boy had a bit of a sassy streak in him. So where was I? Shoyuda mumbled to himself. Oh yeah, no phone privileges for a while. Izuku's eyes snapped back up to Shoyuda in shock. A teenager without their phone? It was the ultimate form of torture. Shoyuda reveled in Izuku's horror. It's just so your friends can't harass you. And to make sure Bakugo doesn't try texting you tomorrow. You're also going to live with me. I put in a request for a little house to be set up for you, Eri, and me here on campus. I'm not comfortable with you living with Bakugo right now. You are going to be going to therapy. That's not up for debate. It's something you need. Shoyuda quickly added, seeing Izuku was about to protest. Your classmates will no doubt try and drown you with love and support. Nothing wrong with that, but you need the freedom to move around and process things without constantly being bombarded by them. I get the feeling that they would try to stick to you like glue. Shoyuda concluded. Izuku sat quietly, processing everything Shoyuda had told him. After a few minutes of organizing his thoughts, Izuku resigned himself to his fate. Is there anything else I should know about? Izuku asked, looking over at Shoyuda. Nodding, Shoyuda looked to the side. He was uncomfortable, but he would do anything to help his problem child. Yeah, Shoyuda began. I asked Present Mike to come over and talk to you. He's good at giving emotional support and helping people deal with their feelings. He may be a loud mouth, but he's a great listener and almost always knows the best ways to help someone. He's helped me a lot. Shoyuda admitted. Why would you need to be helped a lot? Izuku asked, clearly confused. Izuku couldn't fathom his teacher ever being anything but stoic and capable. Shoyuda blushed. Without his capture weapon to hide behind, his blush was very noticeable on his fair skin. Izuku watched Shoyuda blush in awe. Eraserhead, blushing? It was mind-boggling for the teen. Shoyuda hated talking about himself, but if it could help Izuku deal with his own problems, then he would go through it. A hero's job is to help those in need, however they can. And it was even more detrimental, seeing as he was also a teacher, and was responsible for his students' well-being. Well, Shoyuda coughed once out of nervousness before he continued. When Hizashi and I were first years at UA, he found out about my less than desirable home life. He stepped up and made sure I was safe, and helped me through it. I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't have been there by my side through it all. Izuku was shocked and looked like he had a million questions. Before he could ask any, Shoyuda stood up. Let's continue this in the living room. Shoyuda suggested. If he was going to tell Izuku his story, then it was best that they were comfortable, because it was a long story. Shoyuda was 4 years and 3 weeks old when he gained his quirk. It was combination of his parents' quirks. His mother had a weak levitation quirk. It allowed her to levitate anything that she was looking at a few inches off the ground. The quirk cancelled out once she blinked. His father's quirk was the ability to weaken any quirks that were directly next to him. It was a mutation quirk that was always active. His father's entire eyes were a glowing red. When Shoyuda first discovered his quirk, he proudly marched up to parents to inform them. Like any small child would, he thought that his family would praise him for having such an interesting quirk. He felt that it was the perfect combination of theirs. He was naive. The discord in his family was fairly new, and his young mind couldn't see any reason for them not to be happy about his discovery. He was only 4 after all. He didn't know better yet. In the living room of their small apartment, both of his parents sat, ignoring each other. His father sat on a stained light blue felt couch, watching their small TV and drinking beer. He drank beer a lot lately. His mother sat on a slightly darker blue love seat, to the right of his father. She was reading one of those celebrity magazines from the corner store. His mother was more peaceful than his father, who recently was almost always angry. She was more likely to just brush him off, to tell Shoyuta not to bother her and send him away. Shoyuta missed his mother's warm hugs. He can't remember when she stopped being warm. He chose to approach her with the newly acquired information, seeing her as the safer option. Shoyuta crept around the sofa over to his mother and tugged on her pants leg to get her attention. She sighed, looking away from her magazine and down at him. "What is it, Sho-chan?" His mother asked him. Shoyuta loved it when she called him Sho-chan. It made him feel safe. Feel loved. Shoyuta smiled. The use of his nickname was a sign that she was in a good mood. Shoyuta smiled up at her shyly. He wasn't a child prone to smiling often, twisting the hem of his, just a little too big shirt. "I got my quirk, mommy," Shoyuta blurted, bursting with joy at having gained his quirk a little earlier than his classmates at preschool. None of them had gotten theirs yet. "Oh?" his mother asked, clearly a little shocked that it had developed so soon after turning 4, but pleased that he was an early bloomer. Shoyuta had always been a fast learner and liked to do things right away, just so he wouldn't have to learn to do them later. Why do it tomorrow when you can do it today? So it should be no surprise that his quirk followed that example. "And what is your quirk?" she asked, expecting it to be either hers or his father's. Children rarely got mixed versions if the parents' quirks were different or didn't follow some theme. "I can stop someone's quirk by looking at them," he announced proudly, looking up at her with bright dark eyes. Just like hers. He had spent the better part of the morning on the landing of their apartment, experimenting with the old lady that lived next door, Mrs. Akashi. Shoyuta liked to sit on the landing and watch the people on the street below walk past, looking down on them like a hero observing those he had to protect. His neighbor, an old widow who was almost completely deaf, loved to join him. Her apartment was the last one on their floor, so not having to worry about people needing to get around her, she would pull out her rocking chair and would sit knitting while people watched. He would sit holding the ball of yarn, unrolling it as she needed. He was a helpful boy, and Mrs. Akashi called him her hero. That's what they had been doing this morning. His parents arguing, while not loud, had woken him up. Not being able to fall back asleep, Shoyuta had crept out of the apartment, with the help of a step stool his mother had placed by the door for such occasions. Better to be able to get out on his own than to have to draw attention to himself. It was very common to find Shoyuta sitting or playing by himself on the landing. There weren't any other children within walking distance, and living in the less than desirable part of town, Shoyuta wasn't allowed to wander around on his own. So there they both sat that morning, Mrs. Akashi knitting, and Shoyuta holding the ball of yarn, when he started to feel strange. His eyes started to burn and itch, and he felt his short hair start to rise. Almost as if his mom had held the blow dryer near him, causing his hair to lift from the air current. But just as quickly as it started, it stopped. His eyes still burned and itched some, but not like before. His hair also resumed its natural state, the wavy locks lying against his head again. It was strange. Realizing what was happening, he quickly got his neighbor's attention and sloppily signed to her. She had been teaching him the basics of JSL because she couldn't really hear anymore. They had spent a couple of hours experimenting, and had learned that as long as he looked at someone without blinking he could stop their quirk, even if it was only for 10 seconds. Mrs. Akashi's quirk was the ability to make her hands glow like a very bright night light, and Shoyuta practiced erasing it, over and over until his eyes burned too much. Much to Mrs. Akashi's amusement and Shuta's dismay, his hair floated every time he used his quirk. He had hoped that it was a one-time fluke or the wind, because floating hair just seemed impractical and silly. Shoyuta was also not pleased that his irises turned a glowing red. They reminded him too much of his father's angry red eyes. Shoyuta was standing proudly in front of his mother, waiting to be complimented on such a cool quirk. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. His father slammed his beer can onto their wooden coffee table, spilling beer at the impact. He growled out, "What do you mean you can fucking stop quirks? I can't even do that, you bastard brat." His father slurred his words a bit, clearly in the beginning stages of drunkenness. Shoyuta spun around and pressed his back into his mother's legs, intimidated by the man in front of him. His father wasn't a tall man or even a muscular man, but to a small 4-year-old boy he might as well have been as big as a bear. He looked at his father with wide, fearful eyes. While his father hadn't ever hit him or his mother, his loud voice and vicious words were scary and hurt. His father had always had a quick temper, but his temper never seemed to leave anymore. Shoyuta missed the days when his father would ruffle his hair or fly him to his room. Holding Shoyuta in his large hands, zooming Shoyuta around in the air before depositing him in his bed. His mother placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and gave it a gentile squeeze. She stayed seated, knowing that if she stood up, her husband would take it as a challenge. Keeping her voice soft and calm, she quickly tried to defuse the situation. "Hun, you know this is how quirks tend to work. Kids' quirks are usually stronger than their parents'. Your quirk is stronger than your mother's after all." "Shut up, cow." His father growled at his mother. Shoyuta knew that his mother hated when she was called that. She was a bit sturdier than most women, not fat by any means, she just wasn't slender or petite. If she trained, she would have had the body shape perfect for boxing. "I knew that," his father continued. "But it ain't right for the worthless brat to have a quirk better than me. He ain't gonna fucking amount to nothing anyway." His mother nodded along, agreeing with his father to placate him. She slowly nudged Shoyuta towards his bedroom. Standing up herself, she slowly walked over to her husband and offered to get him another beer. Shoyuta quietly made his way to his room, and once inside he closed his door, then threw himself face down on his bed. A soft sob making its way out of his throat. He didn't like to cry, didn't see the point in crying, but 4-year-olds don't have great control over their emotions. So he cried into his pillow, trying not to make any noise that would draw the attention of those in the living room. His mother disliked crying more than his father did. Things continued like that. His father telling him he would be nothing because his quirk was nothing. His mother agreeing so as not to aggravate his father. His father became angrier and more mentally and physically abusive, and his mother more distant and at times violent towards him too. Not being able to take her anger out on her husband, the one who caused her unhappiness, she slowly began to turn it on her son. If she wasn't ignoring him, she would pinch him or push him, one time going so far as to even slap him. His only safe haven was the landing and his neighbor. Time skip. Shoyuta was 14 and in middle school, preparing for entrance exams for high school. Shoyuta was at school, it was few months before the school break, and he sat silently at his desk at the back of the classroom. He was studying the syllabus for the school he hoped to attend, UA. His parents had no idea he was planning on joining the hero school, and for good reason. The last time he had mentioned that he wanted to be a hero, he had been 9. His father had yelled at him that he could never be a hero with his useless quirk. He would only get himself and others killed, his quirk was fucking worthless, he was fucking worthless. Said his father had gone on a rampage, bearing into Shuta's room and gathering all his hero merchandise, it wasn't much, and tossed it in a trash bag. He had forced Shoyuta to go and throw it in the dumpster himself, threatening Shoyuta not to even try and keep one thing or else he would punish him. Shoyuta never mentioned wanting to be a hero ever again, just kept his dream close to his heart. He was older now, capable of taking care of himself, something his parents expected him to do. He had learned early on how to forge their signatures, and thankfully they didn't care what he did with his life, as long as it wasn't anything illegal and that he was home by curfew. They did not want him doing anything that would have the police brought to them. They didn't care what school he went to and he didn't plan on telling them which one it was either. He knew if his father found out he would force him to choose another school, so he wasn't going to let that happen. Shoyuta sat at his desk, drilling all the information he could into his brain so as to be ready for the preliminary exam for UA. Shoyuta had learned that not only did UA have an entrance exam, but you had to pass a preliminary exam just to be able to take it. Thankfully Shoyuta had always been smart, and years of being friendless. No one wanted to be friends with the antisocial boy whose quirk erased quirks and who dressed like a hobo, meant that he had plenty of free time to devote to studying. Also having no friends meant that he didn't have to try and hide his home life. Being friendless was a blessing and was logical. That's what Shoyuta told himself as he watched groups of friends laugh and cut up with each other. He did not need that. He did not want that. He ignored the ache in his chest that said otherwise. Once school was out for the day, he quickly made his way home and to his neighbor's apartment. This was his routine: leave for school after his parents left for work, grab the bento from next door that Mrs. Akashi made for him every day. Go to school, leave and hang out at his neighbor's apartment and eat dinner there. Hang out on the landing until right before curfew, sneak into his room for a change of clothes, sneak to the bathroom for a quick shower, then sneak back to his room for the rest of the night. Shoyuta had become an expert at stealth. He rarely got caught. When he did, he usually got smacked on the back of the head or tripped up for creeping around. His neighbor knew that things were strained with his family, but being deaf meant that she never heard to what extent. So there was nothing she could do but coddle Shoyuta as much as she could and give him the love he was lacking in his life. The other neighbors didn't care and knew to mind their own business, some of them having similar issues as his family. Domestic disputes and violence were common in his neighborhood and were rarely reported, most people being on the wrong side of the law in one way or another. Shoyuta had dinner with her like he did every day. She was an amazing cook, but despite her best efforts of teaching him, Shoyuta could only grasp the basics. They sat chatting together after dinner until time for Shoyuta to leave. After hanging out on the landing for a while, Shoyuta crept into his apartment and safely went about his routine and went to bed. The next day was Saturday, and Shoyuta had plans to go to the library to study. His father usually slept late on the weekends, so he only expected to see his mother when he woke up this morning. He should have been more careful, should have paid closer attention, but he was excited to have the whole day to himself. He usually spent his weekends helping his aging neighbor with chores that were becoming more difficult for her. Shoyuta seriously thought of Mrs. Akashi as his grandmother, not that he would ever admit it out loud. So seeing his father standing in the kitchen, only a few feet from the front door talking with his mother, it made his legs lock in place. His flight response failing him at the worst possible moment. His father turned to him after noticing him out of the corner of his eye. His face scrunched up in displeasure as he walked over to Shoyuta. He swung his fist out towards Shuta's face, stopping only a few inches in front of his nose. Shoyuta automatically flinched. He couldn't help it, even after so many years of his father doing that, he still flinched every time. He was always on edge, expecting it, but he was never able to stop that DMN flinch. He knew it was because it was his father doing it that caused him to flinch. Unsure if his father would actually stop before hitting him. There had been a few times when he didn't. And it was always somehow Shuta's fault. Being told, if you hadn't have fucking moved then I wouldn't have hit ya, or, you was too close. It was always Shuta's fault. His father busted out laughing as Shoyuta slightly curled into himself. Made ya flinch? He laughed, doing it once more and laughing when Shoyuta flinched again. Of course Shoyuta flinched, it was a conditioned response at this point. His nerves were too shot when it came to his father. This was one of his many intimidation tactics that he used against Shoyuta, ensuring that he was too frightened to even consider fighting back. Not that Shoyuta would have, hitting back would only result in him getting hit harder, a fact he had learned when he was 12. He was smaller than his father and untrained, he wouldn't stand a chance. He also didn't want to ruin his chances of going to UA by being involved in a domestic dispute. His father had many ways to bully Shoyuta and the flinching game was one of the nicer ones. His father, whenever he could corner Shoyuta, would push him into walls, not hard enough to break anything, just to slightly bruise him. Sit on his back where he couldn't get up and escape. Having someone bigger than you sitting on top of you while holding you face down was terrifying and left Shoyuta feeling vulnerable and powerless. His father was also very heavy and his weight hurt Shuta's back. His father used to lock Shoyuta in his room until Shoyuta had bought a screwdriver, Mrs. Akashi gave him an allowance, and started using it to remove his door handle and using a coat hanger to escape. His father has never found where Shoyuta keeps it hidden. He also had managed to get a lock for the inside of his room and had put it up one day when both his parents were out. He made sure to lock it at night, not that they ever bothered him, but it was better safe than sorry. He will smack Shoyuta across the arm hard, never enough to bruise deeply, in passing, telling Shoyuta to man up, or stop being a PP, if he ever complains or whines. Calls Shoyuta every vulgar or derogatory word he could think of, saying things to emasculate him, towering over him and yelling insults in his face. PP. Fgot-looking prick. Weak but beach. You look like a pansy but girl? Act like a man. You ain't no diamond PP sucker. Should've heard them all. Which is what his father was doing now, having grown tired of making Shoyuta flinch. He had reached out and was gripping the collar of Shuta's baggy shirt tightly. What the F is with your hair? He screeched in Shuta's face. You wanna be a fucking girl? SCK so bad at being the man you gone and turned into one of them PP boys? You like D now or something? He shoved Shoyuta, who stumbled and fell to the floor hard, the strap of his school bag slipping off his shoulder and pooling around his wrist. Shuta's hair wasn't too long, it barely reached his shoulders. He had been meaning to get it cut. It annoyed him how his hair floated up when he used his quirk. It was a dead giveaway that his quirk was active, more than the red color that his eyes changed to. Keeping it short was the logical decision, but long hours of studying over the past few months with barely any free time to stop and get it cut had resulted in it being longer than it had ever been. He had been planning to get it cut after his visit to the library, but now he felt a bit of rebelliousness seep into him. If it bothered his father so much, then he was going to keep it, just to PSS his old man off. He knew in the back of his mind, as he listened to his father go on a homophobic rant about FGS being everywhere now, that keeping his hair long wasn't the wisest decision. It would only fuel his father's rage, act as a target for his father and mother to tug harshly. He watched as his mother nodded her head in agreement with his father, acting as a united front. She had learned that agreeing with her husband no matter what, especially if it was against Shoyuta, pleased her husband and made him less likely to turn on her. She had thrown away motherly instinct years ago in preference for self-preservation. His father loved it when she agreed with him, inflating his ego. He was always likely to treat her good for the rest of the day when she did that, making sure to treat her especially well that night. Shoyuta slept out on the landing on those nights. His father didn't even bother to keep his voice down, and didn't move the bed frame so that Shoyuta wouldn't have to hear it slamming against the wall repeatedly. His father always laughed the next day, telling Shoyuta that it was educational for Shoyuta to hear, saying it did Shoyuta good to hear how to F woman good, so he wouldn't want to take no D in the butt. Shoyuta always threw up after those nights. Even if he had been outside and couldn't hear anything, he could still remember the times that he had heard. He also would be unable to eat the rest of the days after those nights. His mother, while not as abusive as his father, had her moments where she lashed out at Shoyuta. Shoyuta had been slapped across the face by her numerous times now, never hard enough to leave anything other than a light redness to his cheek that faded after a few minutes, but still made his head rock back from the impact. He sat on the floor, trying to keep his face neutral. He didn't cry, he hadn't cried in years. He had trained himself out of it, and the constant dryness in his eyes from his quirk only acted to help his resolve. He was keeping his face neutral as to not show the burning hatred that he felt for his parents. What had he done to deserve this kind of treatment from them? Nothing. His brain, always logical, supplied for him. He had done nothing to be treated this way. But as far as abuse went, Shoyuta was positive that his situation was better than others. He was never badly physically hurt. He wasn't sure a few bruises here and there would count as abuse. He could survive this until he turned 18. It's not like they were trying to kill him. Just break him. He knew that trying to stand would only get him pushed back down, and trying to run was out of the question with his father towering over him. His father would only wait by the door to ambush him the moment he returned home, being more aggressive at having been disrespected by Shoyuta running away. So he sat and waited until the attention shifted off of him, or until his father got bored. His father growing tired of his wife's constant agreeing and turned on her. Agreeing with him too much set him off because he saw it as her being insincere. He moved into the kitchen to try and tower over Shuta's mother, which was hard considering they were close to the same height. Shoyuta was the shortest, barely reaching his father's chest. He hasn't had a growth spurt yet. His short stature and slim figure only convinced his father more that Shoyuta wasn't a man. And you? His father growled at his mother. You're the reason he's like this beach. Babed him too much as a child. Ranting at her, throwing insults at her and complaining about Shoyuta not being a man and never going to be a man, and it not mattering if Shoyuta had a D, or not because he was just a PP. Having heard enough, Shoyuta quickly crawled to the door, dragging his bag behind him, and slipped out to the safety of the outside world. Once free of the oppressive apartment, he stood up and dashed down the landing, going down the steps 2 at a time and sprinting in the direction of the train station. Shoyuta had developed a thick skin over the years, an effect of being insulted most of his life, but there was only so much he was able to tolerate of having his sexuality and masculinity questioned before it started to hurt. Not that he had anything against the LGBTQ community, like his father clearly did, he just had never felt any relation to those titles. He has never been interested in any type relationship. He wasn't interested in girls or boys, though he did admit that he found girls slightly attractive. It was confusing. He wasn't interested in forming romantic or SXL relationships with them, and had no interest in anything that people his age were definitely interested in. He had heard the other boys in his class talking about girls and guys in SXL ways, and had seen them looking upon in the restrooms. The thought of SXL relationships actually gave him anxiety. He had tried thinking of girls and boys in a SXL way, but he never got a reaction and ended up feeling nauseous afterwards. There was nothing wrong with his body. Once he hit PBRY, his body did have the normal reactions like the other boys. Reactions that the school nurse informed all the boys of his grade that were normal and to be expected, and that could be completely random. He woke up many mornings to these normal reactions, or what his classmates called morning wood. And he could get a reaction himself, just like the nurses said all boys could. But he could not react to anyone, male or female. He had glanced at some of the porn his classmates brought, but he never felt anything when seeing the naked men or women. So he decided that he just wasn't interested in section. And that was fine with him. He also wasn't interested in having friends either. He ignored the little voice deep inside that secretly craved a close friend and the affection and human contact that came along with it. How could he explain to a friend that they couldn't come over because his parents treated him like shit? He could say that he lived in a bad neighborhood, but what if they persisted? No, being alone was safer. He would just rely on Mrs. Akashi being his only good source of human contact. He didn't need the company of anyone his own age. They were all irrational anyway. That's what Shoyuta thought as he made his way to the library. Time skip. Shoyuta was a student at UA, and even better, he was finally in the hero course after having proven himself at the sports festival. He had been moved there from general education. That had been a nightmare to explain when he got home. Being in the Gen Ed course, he didn't have to explain away any bruises, not that they would care. Shoyuta had been beaten up by classmates before, or have any permission slips signed for training. He could always sign them himself. He had gotten away with putting his address down as his neighbor's. She knew he was keeping being at UA a secret from his family, and didn't question it. She knew they weren't supportive. And Shoyuta was good at hiding how awful they treated him from her. He was a very good liar. So any important letters had been sent to her. But the sports festival was broadcast across all TV stations, so imagine his father's surprise at being congratulated at work on his son doing so well. He was almost afraid the cops would be called at the yelling match that had ensued. His father yelling at him to quit and his mother glaring at him from behind his father. Shoyuta, losing his temper for once, had yelled back, screaming that if they wanted him to quit being a hero, they would have to kill him first. That death would be preferable to living with them. His mother had lunged forward and slapped him across the face, knocking his head back with the force of the impact and knocking him to the floor. His father had pulled his mother back by her hair and shoved her away. He turned back to Shoyuta with the most hate-filled eyes and had told him to go ice his face. They didn't speak to him about UA again. His father probably worried that he would snitch to the heroes about his home life if they persisted. They still treated him awfully, but they were extra careful after that not to leave any marks on him. His jaw had hurt for days. Anyway, before he had taken the entrance exam, Shoyuta had done some research and had discovered from the school website that all of the students who had been placed directly in the hero course had physical mutant-type quirks or quirks suited for fighting. Shuta's quirk was not made of combat, and whatever was in the entrance exam, it was probably something hard to fight. He doubted his quirk would be able to go up against it. So Shoyuta had resigned himself to the general education course after having read that it was possible to transfer if he did well at the tournament. And he had definitely done well, having come in third. And that's how he finally found himself in the hero course. He had been in the hero course over a month now, and a very loud blonde boy, who he had beaten during the combat portion of the festival, had pestered him the entire time, doing everything he could think of to force Shoyuta into conversation with him. Shoyuta ignored him at first and even tried being rude and telling the boy to leave him alone, which the boy had responded with a very drawn-out, nope, popping the P at the end. Not used to having someone put so much effort into befriending him, the walls he had built over the years had crumbled and the boy effectively finger-gunned his way into Shuta's life. Shoyuta couldn't find it in his heart to mind, he'd never had a friend before. And the boy made it clear that they were going to be the bestest friends ever. Shoyuta sat at his desk at the back of the classroom and didn't even flinch when a very loud quirk-induced Aizawa was yelled in his direction. Shoyuta didn't flinch around people who weren't his parents. He didn't fear others like he feared his parents. He also knew that his reaction to his parents was conditioned and something he couldn't help. He was not going to show that same weakness to others. He might not be able to do anything about that weakness at home, but at school he could be strong and was allowed to be strong. So he never flinched, not when fighting and not when an overenthusiastic cockatoo threw himself on Shuta's desk, preening and demanding attention as if his life depended on it. Yamada, Shoyuta sighed in acknowledgement. Yamada could be a bit overwhelming at times, constantly showing and needing attention and affection. He was like one of those Tamagotchi pets, you forget to feed it one time and it dies. Shoyuta was a logical person and knew that his friend wouldn't die from lack of attention or not being allowed to drape himself across Shoyuta. He had plenty of other friends, Kayama who was an upperclassman and Ida for example. He didn't need Shuta's constant attention, but the back of his mind told that he shouldn't risk it. Just in case. It was only logical. Come over to my house this weekend, dude. We'll study, listen to some rad songs, and eat junk food till we barf. Yamada begged, letting his shades slip down his nose, doing his best at making puppy eyes at Shoyuta. Shoyuta nodded his head yes, as he had been over to Yamada's house once before with Ida. It was a pleasant two-story American-style house. Yamada's mother was American, that explains his blonde hair and green eyes, and his father was Japanese with brown hair and brown eyes. Yamada's father had been studying pediatrics in America while his mother had been studying pharmaceutics. They met at school, fell in love, and got married quickly. They waited until after they graduated and had been working independently for a few years before they decided to have a child. Yamada Hisashi was born in the US and lived there until he was 3, then his father received an invitation to work at a prestigious children's hospital in Japan that catered to deaf and blind patients and hired deaf doctors. So they had taken the offer and had moved. Yamada's mother worked in the pharmacy part of the hospital. They were nice people, and Shoyuta couldn't help but wonder what being raised by them must have been like. They were patient with Yamada's dramatics, and seemed to indulge him constantly. Whatever their son showed an interest in, they worked to cultivate it, encouraging him to try new things. So by 15, their son was an amateur DJ, spoke not only English and Japanese but also French and Italian, could play the piano, knew JSL and SL, and was now on his way to being a hero. Yamada really was talented and smart. Both of Yamada's parents were deaf. Shoyuta had only found that out and about their lives after he had visited the first time. Apparently their son had been born with his quirk and had damaged his parents' hearing, along with the doctors and nurses. Throughout the years of a young Yamada trying to learn control over his quirk, his parents had gone completely deaf. Not even hearing aids could help them. This was something Yamada felt guilty about, but had come to terms with. All 3 Yamadas were surprised when Shoyuta had shown up with Ida the one time that he had visited, and had started signing to them before his friend could even announce that his parents were deaf. Yamada, being the scatterbrain that he is, had forgot to mention it, and Ida had felt that it wasn't his place to tell Shoyuta. When he and Ida had shown up at the Yamadas, Ida had offered to show him the way and met him at a location they both were familiar with. The Yamadas were all waiting at the threshold to greet Shoyuta and Ida. He had noticed right away the way that they carefully watched everyone's mouth, and the way their voices switch tones at odd places, something that people who can't hear what they are saying do. So without hesitation, Shoyuta had introduced himself using sign language. The look on their faces had been priceless. Shoyuta sat at his desk, agreeing to weekend study session. It was a good excuse to be away from home. The teacher entered the classroom soon after and ordered Yamada to get his overly social butt in his seat. The class had snickered at that while Yamada pouted. So, Saturday eventually rolled around, and Shoyuta found himself in Yamada's bright neon green room with equally bright neon yellow borders. It was a very bright room. Yamada was practically hanging upside down off his bed, reading Heroes Weekly, a stupid gossip magazine about heroes that Shoyuta refused to read. Shoyuta himself was seated cross-legged on the floor, actually studying. Yamada soon got bored of the magazine, letting it fall to the floor with a thud, rolling over to look at Shoyuta. Shoyuta only spared him a quick glance before returning to his notes. He knew Yamada couldn't stay quiet for long, and once he was ready to talk he would. "So when can I visit your house?" Yamada asked. He had asked a few times to visit, and Shoyuta had shot down each one, giving excuses such as, "It's not the safest neighborhood to travel around in if you aren't familiar," or his parents didn't like to have company because they were tired after working all day. And it's small and he would rather hang out somewhere else than be cooped up there. He didn't lie, just omitted the fact that his parents were awful bstrdis. While he knew they wouldn't do or say anything while a guest was around, but once the guest left they would take out their frustrations on him. He also didn't want them to know he had friends, didn't want them to ever meet his friends, because once they did, Shoyuta would have to hear all the insults that are usually directed at him aimed at his friends. He didn't want that, didn't know if he could keep himself from lashing out if they did. Didn't want to know what they would do if he did lash out. He had considered bringing Yamada to his neighbor's apartment, but decided against it. It was just too dangerous to have Yamada that close to his parents. He also knew that Yamada and Mrs. Akashi would get along like two peas in a pod, and that they would talk about him. Not that he had a problem with that, he just knew that Yamada was smart, and that hearing about his life, Mrs. Akashi couldn't anything too risky about his life because she didn't know. He would figure out that Shoyuta spent most of his time with his neighbor. He would fix out that Shoyuta never had any friends, and that she was practically raising him, feeding him and mending his clothes. It wouldn't take long before he put two and two together. Shoyuta sighed, putting his notes aside, and gave Yamada his best deadpan look. "You know why, Yamada?" His friend sat up with a pout, crossing his arms before leveling Shoyuta with his most determined look. "Yeah," he whined. "But I like to know everything about my friends. Where they live so we can hang out or I can send holiday cards. Their number, so I can call and text them dash." Shoyuta interrupted his friend quickly. "You talk to me enough already, Yamada. You've talked to me enough to last 3 lifetimes. You also know I don't have a phone because I can't afford one," Shoyuta said, setting aside his notebook and watching his friend grow more frustrated. Yamada threw his hands up in the air and let out long quirk-induced whine. "I know. I'm just saying." Yamada complained. "Look, the only things I know about you are your favorite color, food, holiday, season, music, book, how tall you are, and that you like cats and sleeping," his friend declared. Shoyuta couldn't stop himself from rolling his eyes. "Isn't that enough?" he asked, leaning back on his hands. "No!" Yamada shouted, using his quirk. Shoyuta activated his own quirk, threatening Yamada with it. His friend was still learning how to control his quirk when stressed or excited. Shuta's quirk seemed to distract his friend for the moment, and when he deactivated his hair fell down to just brush his shoulders. Yamada did a complete 180 and began a rant about his hair. "Dude, your hair is so long. Is your hair thick? It looks like it is it soft? Oh, let me braid it." Yamada gleefully screeched, dashing out of the room and down the hall to his parents' room before Shoyuta could even respond. Seconds later, Yamada dashed back into the bedroom with multiple small hairbands and sat expectantly on the side of his bed. Shoyuta stared at his friend for a moment before giving in and going over to Yamada and settling back between his legs. Shoyuta enjoyed the way his long hair seemed to piss his father off to no end. And now that his father knew he was going to the top hero school, seemed reluctant to do anything more than insult Shoyuta about his hair. Which was fine with him, the less he had to worry about the better. Having his hair brushed and braided was oddly relaxing, and Shoyuta found himself falling asleep sitting up. A small tug on his hair snapped him awake in an instant and he jolted slightly. "Sorry dude, didn't mean to scare you. It's just if you fall asleep and face plant the floor, I won't be able to finish your hair." Yamada muttered. Shoyuta hummed in reply and made sure to keep himself awake. He knew Yamada didn't mean to startle him, and had no way of knowing that his parents had pulled him around by his hair more than once, or that his father pulled it when passing while calling him a pee-pee boy or other unsavory things. He would have to remove the braid before he got home, just to be safe. Once Yamada was done, he launched to his feet pulling Shoyuta up too, and practically dragging Shoyuta to the bathroom to show him his hard work. Shoyuta was impressed. Yamada had done a good job with the French braid. It wasn't long, ending halfway down his neck, but his hair only reached his shoulders, so that was understandable. Shoyuta nodded his approval. Before making his way back to the bedroom to finish his studying, the braid would do a good job at keeping his hair out of his face. Maybe he should let Yamada do this before training at school. It would keep his hair out of his eyes, and would also mean that when he activated his quirk, no one would be able to tell. Shoyuta had requisition goggles with his hero costume to prevent people from telling who he was looking at, and so they couldn't see the red of his eyes when his quirk was active. Yamada seemed happy that Shoyuta approved of his handy work. It probably wouldn't be so bad to let Yamada fix his hair every now and then. When he told him this, a wicked smile crept onto his face, and Shoyuta had the distinct feeling of being a mouse about to be eaten by a vicious cat. "Dude, Kiyama and I are gonna do your hair every day. She knows way more styles than I do. You're so screwed." Yamada laughed wickedly. Yamada sobered up quickly. Shoyuta was amazed at how quickly his friend's mood could change. "You're not giving me the cold shoulder on visiting you because you find me too annoying? Are you?" His friend asked quietly. Yamada was sitting on the floor in front of his bed now, looking down at his lap. Shoyuta sighed. This line of thought he could deal with, though he was surprised that his friend felt such insecurity. He practically oozed confidence, but maybe that was just a facade. "You are annoying," Shoyuta admitted, grinning widely at the boy in front of him to show he was teasing. Shoyuta rarely smiled, and found that he really sucked at it. But it made his friends laugh, so kept doing it. And it worked its magic now, causing Yamada to burst into a loud giggling fit. One of the perks it seemed to having deaf parents was that Yamada didn't have to watch his volume, and could be almost as loud as he wanted, though he did have to consider the neighbors. After he was finished laughing and could talk normally, he was back to being serious. "You sure I can't come over?" he asked, watching Shoyuta intently. "I'm sure," Shoyuta told him again. Yamada nodded, and they went back to studying, with Yamada occasionally stopping to show Shoyuta something on his phone. Shoyuta stayed a few more hours before leaving to head home. He made sure to undo the braid before he reached his apartment. It had been 4 weeks since Shoyuta had visited Yamada at home, and true to his word, he and Kiyama braided Shuta's hair almost every other. It would have been every day, but a teacher wisely pointed out that pulling his hair back so much would make him go bald prematurely, so they had agreed to braid his hair every few days. They didn't braid his hair every time they had hero training because Shoyuta decided he needed to learn how to fight with it down. They were doing combat training, and Shoyuta had his hair pulled back in a French braid, the only braid Yamada knew. He was facing one of the students from Class 1B. She had a mutant-type quirk. Her skin was as thick and tough as an elephant skin, without the wrinkles, and brilliant brown with just a tinge of red to it. Shoyuta felt it was nice color and suited her perfectly, and it was matched by bright curly red hair and eyes as black as night. She was also very tall, around 6 feet. She reminded Shoyuta of an Amazon warrior princess, and he was absolutely intimidated by her. Their fight was short-lived. Shoyuta tried his best to use his speed and short height to make up for the fact that she was way stronger than him, but she had been training longer than he had. She kept landing punch after punch despite his best efforts at avoiding her blows. But one roundhouse kick to his head knocked him out of the fight and out in general. The medical robots had to cart his unconscious body to the infirmary, where one kiss later, Shoyuta was healed. He slept the rest of the class away. Thankfully it was the last of the day, and when he finally woke up, Recovery Girl sent him home. His friends, Yamada, Koyama and Ida, were waiting for him by the entrance gate. They offered to walk home with him, or at least halfway there, but Shoyuta waved them away. He could make it home on his own just fine, as long as he didn't fall asleep while walking. Once home, he sleepily made his way to his room. A side effect of Recovery Girl's healing was that he was absolutely exhausted. He was almost to his room when he heard his father roar. "What the F is that on your head?" Shoyuta spun around to face his father, who was storming over to him from the living room where he had been seated with his mother, she who looked visibly pale and was staring at him with wide eyes. Shoyuta lifted his hand to his head and felt the braids still in place. He had forgotten to undo it, too tired and sore to give it much thought, despite it becoming a habit to do before he reached home. Shoyuta didn't even have time to run or curse himself for his stupidity before his father had reached him, ripping the hairbands out along with some of his hair. Shoyuta cried out as his father dug his fingers into Shuta's hair, getting a firm grip, and started to drag Shoyuta to the bathroom. Shoyuta tried to get free, but the hold on his hair was too strong and his father was walking too fast. He tried hitting him, but his fist barely grazed his father. The man's reach being longer than his own made it easier to hold Shoyuta at a distance. Shoyuta slipped and fell, but his father kept going, dragging him the rest of the way to the bathroom by his hair. He hauled Shoyuta up onto his feet by his hair, all while Shoyuta clawed at him and yelled to be let go. He tried ramming his elbow into his father's side, his fight instinct taking over after all the months of training at school. His father grunted in pain, but didn't stop. He rammed Shoyuta forward into the sink, his stomach colliding painfully with the hard tile and the top of his head knocking the faucet. 2 head injuries in one day. It hurt. The tile pressed into his stomach and his head throbbed. His father's firm grip in his hair hurt. His mother standing in the doorway doing nothing hurt. It all hurt. "Effing let go of me!" Shoyuta screamed. He didn't care if the neighbors heard. He knew they wouldn't do anything to help. His father harshly pressed his face deeper into the bowl of the sink before cutting on the faucet. Shoyuta sputtered as water poured over his mouth and nose, effectively shutting him up. Shoyuta thought he would drown, but once all his hair was soaked, his father cut the water off. Shoyuta gasped in a deep breath. He had feared for a moment that his father was actually trying to drown him. His father yanked one of the drawers under the sink open, pulling out a pair of scissors that he used to trim his hair. Shoyuta began to struggle harder, even though he knew it was pointless. He wasn't in a good position to fight back anymore. His face was practically pressed to the bottom of the sink, leaned so far over that his feet were no longer touching the floor. He tried to kick out a few times, but his father only moved so that one of his legs was pinned between both of Shuta's. Ensuring any more kicking attempts would be futile. He held the scissors as close to Shuta's scalp as he could with him struggling and began to cut. With every cut, Shoyuta sobbed. Strands falling in pools around his face, sticking to his tears and getting in his mouth, almost choking him. His father insulted him with single cut, calling him a fgot, threatening to cut off his PP if he wanted to be a girl so badly. When his hair kept getting shorter, his father moved his hand from Shuta's hair to his neck, using his neck to keep holding him down in the sink. Nearly an hour later, his hair was thick after all. The cutting finally stopped. Shuta's sobs had stopped halfway through the brutal cutting of his hair and had just laid across the sink limply. He just didn't have the energy to fight anymore. His father stepped back satisfied with his work, and Shoyuta sunk to the cold tile floor and curled up on himself. His father pushed past his mother and wandered off somewhere in the apartment. Shoyuta didn't care where, he was just glad his father was away from him. His mother looked at him a moment before sighing too, leaving him to wallow on the floor after telling him to clean the mess up. Shoyuta stayed on the floor for a few minutes before deciding to stand up and assess the damage. He looked in the mirror and wanted to throw up. His hair, which had been just past his shoulders, was now cropped nearly an inch from his scalp. A sob ripped its way out of his throat. What would he tell his friends? His friends? They couldn't braid his hair anymore. Would they be angry with him? He knew they wouldn't. But what would he tell them? What would they believe? What would Yamada believe? He was too smart to believe any of the excuses Shoyuta was running through his head. And with how poorly the cut was, he was going to have to take the clippers and buzz the rest of the hair. The tears started to run down his face again. He complained that his long hair was a disadvantage while fighting for many reasons, but he had really liked his long hair and how his friends had enjoyed playing with it. He enjoyed the contact and didn't mind some of the silly things they had put his hair through. They were having fun, and that made him happy. And now it was all over. He sunk back to the ground and buried his face in his arms. He really should have been worried about what his father had been doing, but he was too tired and too distraught. So he was unaware of his father walking quietly behind him with a belt held tightly in his hand, while Shoyuta sat on the bathroom floor thinking that his punishment was over. Shoyuta was pushed roughly face first onto the bathroom floor, a knee pressed between his shoulder blades to hold him down. I'm gonna beat that pee-pee boy attitude right out of you. No son of mine is going to be a fag. His father growled. Drawing his arm up over his head, in one quick and fluid motion his father brought the belt down across his backside. And he repeated the motion. And again. And again. Shoyuta was losing count on how many times his father hit him. He had never been whipped before, never had been punished so harshly. He could do nothing more than cry out. His voice was rough from his previous crying and it was slowly losing volume. Every time he struggled the belt was brought down harder, so Shoyuta laid there and waited for it to end. He could see black spots dancing across his vision, and worried briefly if he was going to pass out. With the only neighbor who would help him being unable to hear his cries, and the others not caring or not wanting to get involved for whatever reasons, Shoyuta knew that no one was going to be coming to rescue him. No one would call the police for him. No hero was going to swoop in and save the day. He was on his own. There was also no way I'm going to be able to sit down anytime soon after this. Finally, with one last whip, his father got up and left him alone for good. His mother never came back to check on him. He didn't know if she watched like she had done with his hair, but he knew she wasn't there for him now. She wasn't there to help him off the floor and to his room, and he shouldn't have expected her to be. He was on his own. She hadn't tried to protect him from his father in years, opting to keep herself safe. Honestly, she had become just as bad at doing things to make Shuta's life miserable. He was just missing the memory of how she used to be. Shoyuta picked himself up. It took a few tries as his legs kept giving out on him, and he would wind up back on the floor on his hands and knees. But once he was standing and was sure he wouldn't collapse, he made his way out of the bathroom. His father and mother were nowhere to be seen, probably asleep in their room. Which was good, he needed some privacy right now. He made his way to his room. Glancing in the living room, he noticed all the beer bottles that littered the coffee table that weren't there that morning. Well, that explains that, he thought to himself. In his room, he grabbed a change of clothes and walked back out. He picked his school bag up off the floor by his bedroom door, where he had dropped it when the whole nightmare began, and stuffed his clothes in it. Slinging it over his shoulder, he walked to the doorway and slipped his shoes back on before quietly walking out the apartment. It was a long and painful journey to the Yamada house. Shoyuta had to take the train to get there home, and he hadn't sat down the whole time. He knew he wouldn't be able to get back up if he did, so he spent the entire 35-minute ride standing. Shoyuta thought he would throw up a few times from the pain. At least he didn't feel like he was going to pass out again. He had finally made it to Yamada's home, and he was sure it was close to the middle of the night by now, and that his friend was probably asleep. Shoyuta needed his friend though. He needed someone to turn to, someone his parents didn't know and couldn't find. So with the little strength he had left, he pounded his fist against the door repeatedly. He knew from Yamada that the doorbell triggered the lights in the house to flash, and Shoyuta wanted to avoid his friend's parents for as long as he could. Shoyuta heard his friend's quirk-induced voice yell from inside the house, announcing that he heard him, threatening that if this wasn't important, then whoever was outside was fixing to get their eardrums bust wide open. The door was thrown open to reveal a very bedraggled Yamada with his hair down and sticking out in some places. Hizashi was wearing a faded band shirt and plaid pajama bottoms. His glasses sat crookedly on his nose. His friend stared at him for a minute before screeching in horror, "Shoo!" Shoyuta would have been shocked at Yamada using his given name for the first time, but he was too tired and emotionally drained. Before he could say anything, his friend grabbed him and pulled him inside, slamming the door behind them. He pulled Shoyuta carefully along to the living room to a long gray sectional and ordered him to sit down. Shoyuta shook his head and rubbed the back of his neck, wincing at the loss of hair that usually covered his neck. I don't think I can sit down, Yamada. Hizashi. It felt weird saying his friend's given name, but it felt rude not to after his had been used. He saw a look of utter horror cross Yamahizashi's face. Remembering that Hizashi had recently come out as by SXL, he realized that his friend was jumping to the worst conclusion. That Shoyuta had been raped. Shoyuta hurried to ease his friend's fear, at least as much as he could. No. Hizashi, no. I was whipped earlier, so I think it will hurt too bad to sit down. That's all. Hizashi still stared at him in horror, his face paling at what Shoyuta had told him. Hizashi swallowed, he had tears pouring down his face and he was trembling. That's all. That's all. You were effing whipped. What were you whipped with? But why the hell were you whipped? Why would anyone even whip you? He scared Shoyuta. What's going on? Hizashi cried, quirk activating at random. Shoyuta flinched at the loudness and looked down at his feet, unwilling to meet Hizashi's gaze. A belt. Shoyuta mumbled. My father beat me with a belt after he cut off all my hair. Shoyuta choked out. All because I had my hair in effing braid. I usually undo it before I get home. My long hair made him mad enough already. But today I was just so tired that I forgot. He had been drinking and when he saw my hair, and he just snapped. Hizashi pulled Shoyuta into a hug, wrapping his arms around him and cried into Shuta's shoulder. Shoyuta cried too, burying his face in his friend's chest and holding on to his shirt. Hizashi had hit a growth spurt and was taller than him now. They stayed like that before Hizashi let go. You need to lie down, and I'll go wake my parents. My dad will need to check your injuries and you know we have to call the police, right? But that can wait until he checks you over and you tell them what happened. What's been happening? Don't lie and say it's the first time they've hurt you. I can effing tell when you're lying. Shoyuta nodded his head. He knew this would happen when he came here. But he was surprised that Hizashi could tell when he was lying. That's probably why he constantly tried to find out why he wasn't allowed over to Shuta's. Seeing through Shuta's half-truths and worrying for his friend. Hizashi helped him lay down on his stomach on the couch. Frown worsening with every wince Shoyuta made. Once he was sure Shoyuta was as comfortable as he could get, he dashed out of the living room and up the stairs. Shoyuta tilted his head to the side to watch the stairs. It wasn't long before Shoyuta heard multiple feet pounding down the stairs, and Mr. Yamada came sliding into view. The couch faced the wall that the stairs was hidden behind. Mr. Yamada quite literally slid into the living room, his socked feet having little traction on the hardwood floor. He came to a stop once he saw Shoyuta, looking relieved that he didn't have a dying boy on his couch. What did Hizashi tell them? The boy in question plowed into his father moments after he had stopped, followed by Mrs. Yamada, who plowed into her son. Shoyuta snorted at the three Yamada pile up. That seemed to snap Mr. Yamada out of his daze, who quickly but carefully made his way over to Shoyuta. He crouched down in front of Shoyuta and tentatively brushed his fingers over what was left of his hair. Shoyuta had to repress a sob. Mr. Yamada scooted away some so that Shoyuta could see his hands and began to sign. Shoyuta, I need you to tell me what happened to you. All Hizashi could tell us was that your father was a BSRD and that you're lucky to be alive. That's why Mr. Yamada had been so freaked out. Shoyuta glanced over at Hizashi. He had his face buried in his mother's shoulder and was sobbing as quietly as somebody with a voice quirk could. Shoyuta didn't feel like talking, his throat hurt and he was just too tired to actually talk. So he rolled over onto his side so that he could put his hands in front of himself for Mr. Yamada to see. He tried his best not to wince or make too many pain sounds, but by the look on the man's face he had failed. Signing, Shoyuta responded. My parents can be very verbally abusive and sometimes physically. Never anything bad enough to leave a lasting mark. My father is very homophobic, and me having long hair has always made him mad. He calls me a pee-pee boy, among other things. Today when I came home from school I was tired from getting knocked out in a fight, and forgot to undo the braid my hair had been put in. Mr. Yamada motions for him to continue when Shoyuta had paused. My father had been drinking heavily, and when he saw my hair he snapped. He ripped my hair out of the braid and dragged me to the bathroom. I had fallen and he just kept dragging me. Forced me to hang over the sink, knocking my head against the faucet hard, then he cut all my hair off. I tried to fight back to get free, but I wasn't in any position to do so and too weak from having a concussion healed. I've never tried fighting back before, too scared of what he would do, and the one time I try I fail. Shoyuta was crying again but continued anyway. After he cut my hair he left me in the bathroom. My mom had watched but didn't stop him. Shouldn't be surprised. She had almost as physically violent as him. I was too busy crying, wasn't paying attention, I didn't hear him come back. He forced me to the floor and held me down with his knee while he whipped me with a belt. I thought I was going to pass out. Once he finished he left me alone for good. I think they both went to bed after that. I came here because I didn't want to put my deaf elderly neighbor in danger and because they don't know I have friends now. Once Shoyuta had finished he pulled his hands to his chest and closed his eyes. He wasn't crying anymore, it hurt too much to cry. He was tired of crying, it didn't solve anything. His eyes shot open as his head was lifted and placed in a warm lap. Looking up, he saw Mrs. Yamada. She was openly crying and started to gently rub her thumb across his cheek. Mr. Yamada had gotten up and had left the room. Hizashi was standing by the stairs, he looked angry and determined. All the Yamadas were horrified at what they had been told. Were horrified that Shoyuta had made his own way all the way to their home in the dead of night. While in so much pain, Shoyuta was glad Hizashi didn't know where he lived. He was worried his friend would march to his house and scream at his parents until they lost their minds or died. It wasn't long before Mr. Yamada returned, carrying a first aid kit. He faced Yamada and mouthed something to Hizashi, who left and returned upstairs. Shoyuta didn't want his friend to leave, but assumed Mr. Yamada had a good reason for sending him away. He walked over to Shoyuta and stood in front of him, handing Mrs. Yamada the first aid kit. Once his hands were free, he signed to Shoyuta. I need to check your injuries, and my wife will act as a witness. I know it's awkward, but you're going to have to remove your clothes. Shoyuta was extremely embarrassed. Undressing in front of Mr. Yamada was one thing. He was a man, but Mrs. Yamada? He knew he had to do this, it was the logical course of action. Mr. Yamada was a doctor for all, even if it was just for kids. But if this got him out of having to actually go to a hospital, then he would do it. This is why he sent Hizashi away. They didn't want Hizashi to see any injuries that Shoyuta might have. Did the fact that it was logical to get checked over to see if he needed to be rushed to the hospital make it less embarrassing? Nope. Was Shoyuta going to do it anyway? Yep. With the help of Mr. Yamada, Shoyuta stripped his school uniform and underwear off. It was humiliating to be standing in the Yamada's living room, naked as the day he was born, with almost the same amount of hair as then. Mrs. Yamada politely looked away, just filling the role that a nurse usually fulfills while a doctor examines a patient. She's just there as an observer who doesn't actually have to observe, just a presence supposed to keep the doctor and patient at ease. Mr. Yamada takes note of the bruise on Shuta's stomach, poking to access the swelling, seemingly satisfied that Shoyuta probably doesn't have any internal injuries, just bruising. He pressed the top of Shuta's head, where his head had hit the faucet. Shoyuta winced at the pain and Mr. Yamada looked at him with sympathy. He left Shuta's head alone and signed, "There is some swelling. You'll have a nice knot on your head. But I don't think you have another concussion." He slowly spun Shoyuta around so that his back is facing him, and takes in a sharp breath. Shoyuta can't see for himself, but he's sure it's not a pretty picture. Which is a shame, because Shoyuta had been told by Kiyama that he had a perfectly round butt. He knew his father was beating him with as much force as he could, but he didn't think it would actually cause much damage through his clothes other than bruising. Mr. Yamada must have signed something to his wife, because she starts rummaging around in the first aid kit. Finding what she needs, she passes them over to her husband. Shoyuta is just starting to wonder what he's doing, when he feels the first sting. Shoyuta curses loudly, glad that the Yamadas that are present are deaf and not looking at his mouth. Hey, that hurt. I must have a cut or two. Shoyuta winces again as the cotton ball soaked in rubbing alcohol is pressed to another cut. Finally the torture is over and Mr. Yamada stands up. He had been crouched down while tending to Shuta's backside, a fact that mortified Shoyuta. He paused Mr. Yamada's signing to his wife to get the man's attention, informing him that he had grabbed a change of clothes before he came over. Mr. Yamada nodded and left to fetch his clothes from the front door where he had left his bag. Mrs. Yamada had wandered over to the stairs and was signing. Hizashi must have been sitting on the stairs the whole time. She slowly signed to her son, "He'll be all right, sweetie. Your dad made sure to check over him well, although he'll still have to make a trip to the hospital later for an official checkup." Shoyuta frowned at that. He really didn't want more people looking at him naked. He has lots of bruises and some minor cuts on his bottom. She continued, "Bottom? Really? He's just mainly very sore and probably very tired. But he'll recover quickly, although it might take a few days before he can sit down." Mr. Yamada had returned with his clothes and helped Shoyuta get dressed in a loose shirt and sweatpants. Seeing that he was dressed, Mrs. Yamada motioned for her son that he could come down. Mr. Yamada helped Shoyuta lay back down on the couch on his stomach, and Hizashi dashed across the room to his side. Hizashi knelt in front of the couch and sobbed in Shuta's face. "Shoyuta," he wailed. "You should have told me." Mrs. Yamada returned to her position as Shuta's personal pillow, rubbing his head with her hand. Shoyuta sighed, trying his best to stay awake. "I thought I could handle it until I turned 18. It's never been that bad before." Hizashi's father had walked back upstairs, but returned to see Shoyuta say that. He frowned, taping Hizashi on the shoulder and handing him a silver flip phone. Looking at Shoyuta he signed, "Even if it wasn't that bad before, you shouldn't have had to go through that. You should have told someone, but I can understand that having gone through that your whole life, you probably didn't think to tell anyone because it's something that has always been done. Children get conditioned to stay quiet, and clearly you were conditioned. You probably don't really see yourself as an abuse victim, seeing your situation as mild." Mr. Yamada asked. Shoyuta nodded his head and Mr. Yamada sighed. He looked like he wanted to say more but changed his mind. Getting Hizashi's attention, he signed for him to call the police, seeing as he was the only one aside from Shoyuta who could hear. And Shoyuta clearly needed a break. Hizashi nodded and dialed the police. He was clearly nervous about the responsibility, but dutifully informed the police of the situation. Shoyuta had fallen asleep before Hizashi had gotten off the phone with the police, and it felt all too soon before he was being nudged awake by Mrs. Yamada. An officer with a cat for a head and a plain-looking man in a trench coat and hat stood in front of him. The officer in the trench coat addressed him. "Hello, Aizawa. I'm Officer Tsukachi, and this is Officer Sansa. We have a few questions for you, and would appreciate your cooperation." Shoyuta nodded, but made no move to sit up. He was tired and he could talk to them laying down just as well as he could sitting up, and he didn't think he was going to be able to sit up anytime soon. Tsukachi gave him a small smile before continuing, clearly not bothered by Shoyuta staying lying down. Hizashi was sighting by his feet, and gave his ankle a comforting squeeze. He could sense Mr. Yamada's presence behind the couch. Officer Tsukachi asked him all manner of questions. Where he lived, his parents' names, what had happened when he returned home from school, about his father calling him a pee-pee boy. Apparently Tsukachi took discrimination about sexuality very seriously and only nodded in understanding when Shoyuta admitted that he didn't feel any desires or need for romantic relationships. He had Shoyuta recount as much of the insults and abuse as he could remember. The Yamadas were clearly horrified by what Shoyuta admitted to being called. It was something they all feared Hizashi would have to face one day. Hizashi was crying his eyes out and he could understand why. Hizashi was an emotional person, but Mr. and Mrs. Yamada's tears confused him. He had only met them twice before and couldn't understand why they were crying for him, but he guesses it didn't really matter. If they wanted to cry for him, that was fine. Shoyuta was done crying and hoped he never cried again. Finished with their questions, the officers had the Yamadas drive Shoyuta to the hospital while they followed along. He needed an official checkup, and pictures of the damage needed to be taken, to Shuta's horror. He didn't protest or fight it, just went along with it, ready for the whole ordeal to be over with so that he could go back to sleep. It was 3:34 in the morning when they made it back to the Yamadas. Everyone was visibly tired and ready to sleep the pain away. Tsukachi had sent a pair of officers to his home while they were still at the hospital and informed Shoyuta that they were going to be brought in where he could question them. Before they had parted ways, Tsukachi had leaned over to Shoyuta and whispered, "And just so you know, my quirk is lie detector, your parents are screwed." He had left a madly grinning Shoyuta with two very confused Yamadas and one that knew the smile meant something good. Or at least Shuta's version of good. Back at the Yamada house, Hizashi nearly carried him upstairs to his room and to his own bed. Hizashi was still feeling anxious and didn't want Shoyuta to be left alone in the guest bedroom. They both promptly fell asleep as soon as their heads hit the pillows. Things happened quickly after that. His parents were arrested and charged with multiple instances of child abuse. His father received 25 years in prison while his mother got 15. Hizashi really wanted Shoyuta to live with him and be his brother, but when Shoyuta told him that his neighbor, the one who had practically raised him, wanted Shoyuta to live with her, Hizashi relented. But promised to visit him every weekend, and that Shoyuta had to visit him at least 3 times during the week. Shoyuta would still see Hizashi every day at school, but the boy had become possessive of him and declared himself, Kayama and Ida as the Shoyuta protection squad. He supported and encouraged Shuta's therapy, going with him and sitting in the waiting room, even if it was for hours some days. All his friends bought him beanie hats to wear until his hair grew out to a length he was happy with. Hizashi would patiently prod Shoyuta to talk about how he felt, not wanting him to suppress his emotions. Always willing to listen, never interrupting or telling him his feelings were wrong, or telling him he was a victim. Shoyuta didn't want to be called a victim, or expecting him to have a breakdown. Shoyuta was very good at holding himself together and rarely fell apart. Sometimes Hizashi was more helpful than his actual therapist. He never got angry when Shoyuta told him that he only felt anger about his situation. He didn't feel sad for himself. He was just sad. He didn't judge Shoyuta when he said that he had mainly cried that night because he had lost his hair. He had cried from the pain and shock of being whipped, from feeling weak, and because Hizashi had cried. Hizashi never gave his opinion on anything except for his opinion on Shuta's parents. He was just there for Shoyuta when he needed him. His abuse had been something that had gone on for so long it had become just a part of his life that he had accepted, and now that it was over, it was just over. Shoyuta had always prided himself over his ability to adapt, and this was just something he had to adapt to. He did have moments where at school when they were training and he found himself pinned down, he would panic a little, but he was always quick to cool his panic and think logically. He worked twice as hard until none of his classmates could pin him. Unfortunately, and to Shuta's shock, he couldn't stomach having his hair in a braid anymore. It made him feel physically sick. So his friends settled for elaborate buns, or buying cat hairbands to pull his hair into ponytails. He still enjoyed the feeling of their hands in his hair though. He knew they wouldn't hurt him. Hizashi was a constant in his life throughout high school, a brother in every way but blood. Filling Shuta's silence with his never-ending chatter, and remaining silent when Shoyuta did have something to say. He endlessly teased Shoyuta and pulled him to every social gathering their friends had. Shoyuta had eventually become Hizashi's voice of reason, because as Namuri put it, Hizashi has no chill. Hizashi eventually became Zashi, and Shoyuta became Sho. Sometimes people forgot that Shoyuta wasn't the Yamada's emo son, and that he wasn't even related to them. Shoyuta kept his surname. He would not let his name be a symbol of fear for him. He would make the name Aizawa something meaningful. It wouldn't be a name full of nothing but hate and abuse. Shoyuta would make it something strong and caring. 4 years after graduation, Hizashi stood by Shuta's side at Mrs. Akashi Miname's funeral. Hizashi and his parents had held Shoyuta afterwards on the couch of their home while he cried for the first time in years. He had patched up Shoyuta after many patrols where Shoyuta hadn't been fast enough to evade injury, and Shoyuta did the same for Hizashi, even though those times were less frequent. They had applied to teaching positions at UA at the same time. Shoyuta dragging Hizashi into the career after Kayama had put in a recommendation for Shoyuta. Hizashi laughed every time Shoyuta expelled the majority of his students. Calling him a grumpy hobo caterpillar, Hizashi and Namuri had bought his sleeping bag as a joke after finding him asleep on the uncomfortable couch in the teacher's lounge. Teaching and night patrols were exhausting and he never needed a real reason to nap. They had not expected him to actually use the monstrosity. They clearly had underestimated him and his willingness to go along with nearly anything. Hizashi listened to him complain about his reckless students. Was there to carry him to safety after the USJ, took care of him as he healed, and lectured him about returning to work too soon after. Made him help announce at the sports festival. Was there for him after the attack on the training camp. Watched with him as the #1 hero lost his power and retired. Listened to his complainants about dorm life. Cried to Shoyuta when Sir Night Eye died, didn't judge him when he didn't cry. Understood when he finally cried over his student losing his power and possibly his promising future as a hero. Supported him in fostering Eri, helping to ease her into a normal lifestyle, and absolutely spoiling her. And now he would help him with the mess that is Midoriya Izuku. And he would absolutely be there to listen to Izuku, just like he always is for Shoyuta. By the time Shoyuta was done telling Izuku his past, the boy was crying hard. He had curled himself under Shuta's arm and had a death grip around Shuta's waist, clinging to Shoyuta as if he could squeeze the pain and suffering of Shuta's past out of him. Shoyuta was letting him try as he pat Izuku's back awkwardly. Izuku's position at his side was making it difficult to do, but Shoyuta didn't give up. His story had taken less than an hour to tell, but to Shoyuta it felt like a lifetime. Years of hurtful words and hurtful hands, from the people who were supposed to love and protect him. Shuta's past wasn't something he told just anybody. Not even Namuri or Tensei knew the extent of his abuse. Just the Yamadas. His past was something he tried to avoid thinking about. But he felt that Izuku needed to know that he wasn't weak for being abused by his childhood friend for years. Having someone who was supposed to be on your side turn against you didn't make you weak, it made them weak. Shoyuta was far from weak, had learned that his abuse didn't make him weak, and he would make sure Izuku knew he wasn't either. Izuku was strong, and he would not let the boy think otherwise. Shoyuta had seen Izuku second-guess himself many times in class at the beginning of the year, had been hesitant to raise his hand or speak up. His friends had brought him out of his shell and lifted his confidence in himself. They encouraged him and trusted his judgment, and that had done wonders for his self-esteem. He began raising his hand more often in class, speaking with confidence, and not being daunted when he got something wrong. Shaking it off, and trying better next time. Shoyuta would deny that he had felt a fondness in his heart at the positive growth Izuku had made. Shoyuta had a soft spot for shy and awkward students. Sue him. It's not like he was going to play favorites. He was harsh with everyone. But to know his lack of self-confidence came from the actions of a fellow classmate angered Shoyuta. It also set him off how he had missed the signs that it was anything more than just the two boys butting heads. He had seen Bakugo's aggression towards Izuku, had seen Izuku's bright personality dim around the boy. Had watched him flinch at Bakugo's explosions and explosive attitude. But Izuku had flinched at everyone. Any time another student got close to him or spoke to him, he became nervous. Flinching as if he expected to be hit. He knew the boy had to have been bullied to react that way, and even being nervous around the teachers. As if he didn't trust them. He could understand being nervous around Shoyuta himself. Shuta's personality and appearance didn't exactly scream friendly. But Shoyuta had seen Izuku flinch when Present Mike had tried to throw his arm around the boy's shoulder one day while conversing with him while walking down the hall. Mike, not being as dense as everyone thinks, pulled his arm away casually without breaking conversation. He had whined to Shoyuta about how bad it made him feel that he had made the green bean uncomfortable and had made it his goal to get Izuku to trust him. So that's why Shoyuta wasn't entirely sure if it was just Bakugo personally that made him that way, or if he responded like that to everyone and just freaked out more toward Bakugo because of the blonde's volatile nature. He just wasn't sure. He was going to keep observing Izuku to try and find out more, but then the greenette became more confident. Grew a backbone and started standing up for himself. He was more self-assured, didn't flinch as often. So Shoyuta put it to the back of his mind, where it was forgotten in favor of more pressing matters. He should have looked into their pasts anyway. Izuku had been failed by those around him, and Shoyuta couldn't help but add himself to that list. After hearing Izuku's story, Shoyuta was shocked that the kid had the ability to trust anyone after being let down so many times by those around him. Shoyuta wanted Izuku to trust him, to feel safe in telling Shoyuta his secrets, safe enough to reveal what he was holding back. That's why he told Izuku his story, and to put them both on even ground. A story for a story. They both had been hurt by people they cared about, let down and forced to fight for themselves and their dreams. They could relate to each other. Izuku mumbled something against his side, startling Shoyuta from his thoughts. "Speak up, problem child, I don't speak mumble." Shoyuta laughed, ruffling Izuku's soft curls. Izuku lifted his face from Shuta's side. Shoyuta was starting to feel like a mother monkey with her baby on her back as much as Izuku had been clinging to him. "I said," Izuku repeated between hiccups. "Have you seen your parents since then?" "Why do you want to know?" Shoyuta asked. He could have just given Izuku a straight answer, but he didn't feel like doing that. Something in him told him to press for a reason. When I first got into UA, I had hoped that I wouldn't be in a class with Kaken. I don't mind anymore, but if I hadn't been forced to be around him, I probably would have avoided him as much as possible. So I was just curious if you had confronted your parents?" Izuku admitted. It felt like Izuku was telling him the truth, or at least partial truth. Maybe he should call Tsukachi after all. It's annoying having Izuku dance around, dangling whatever secret he's hiding just out of Shuta's reach. Shoyuta sighed and rubbed his hand that wasn't resting on Izuku's head across his face. No point in not answering the boy, and maybe the more Izuku starts to trust him, the closer he will get to the unfiltered truth. "No. I haven't seen them. I never saw the point in confronting them because that would mean that I held some sort of expectations. Be it wanting them to apologize and see their errors, or try and mend our relationship, I just didn't think it was necessary. I didn't want or need to fix things between us. I was better off without them. I didn't want to risk them trying to hurt or control me again." He felt Izuku tense at his side for a moment. It was brief and Shoyuta had no idea what triggered it. He replayed what he had just said in his mind, and anything he said could have bothered the boy. Izuku sniffled and mumbled, "I didn't confront Kaken either, not really." Shoyuta hummed and moved his hand from Izuku's head as the boy sat up. He twisted his hands together in his lap for a minute before he continued. "We hashed some things out in our fight, but we never addressed the root of our problems. We both just seem to want to forget it all, even though it keeps me up at night sometimes." Izuku said, "I know we will have to talk about it one day. I just don't want to hear him say he doesn't regret it, even though I know he does to some extent." Shoyuta knew what Izuku meant. There was a time, a few years after his parents' incarcerations, that he had been afraid of ever seeing them again. Not because of what they could do to him, he had vowed to himself to never let them lay a hand on him again. No, he was afraid that they would show no remorse in making his life miserable. He didn't want to have them confirm that he had meant so little to them. That is why he still has never sought them out, why he doesn't even want an apology from them, fearing it would all be pointless or meaningless. 15 years later, he doesn't need an apology anymore or their love, but still hates the thought that they might not be sorry. It would hurt if they weren't, but he had long since stopped loving his parents. He was an MCST, he didn't want to face them and potential hurt, so the logical conclusion was to cut them out of his life and never look back. 15 years later, His mother is probably getting out of prison soon. Izuku was far more emotional than Shoyuta ever was or ever will be. He obviously cared about Bakugo, and if Bakugo told Izuku that he didn't regret the things he had done, Izuku would be devastated. Shoyuta doubted Bakugo would say that, but it worried Izuku. "Don't worry, Izuku," Shoyuta said, patting the kid on the back. "He regrets it. And if he doesn't, he will soon," Shoyuta thought to himself. Shoyuta slowly got up and made his way to his bedroom to grab his sleeping bag and lazily made his way back into the living room. He dropped his sleeping bag in front of the coffee table and turned to the TV after picking up the remote. He logged onto Netflix and set a movie marathon of classic Disney movies to play. He figured that he had made Izuku suffer enough today from having the kid spill his tragic past then by telling the green bean his own tragic backstory. Time for a well-deserved break for both of us. Hizashi can shower the kid in love and affection when he gets here. He stepped into his sleeping bag, pulling it all the way on before he turned to Izuku. So, I'm completely emotionally drained and I'm sure you are too. I don't want to talk about myself anymore, you probably don't want to talk about yourself either. Izuku nodded his head in agreement at that. So, movies and naps until Mike gets here after school. Izuku nodded his head again. Good. Shoyuta said, then he let his legs fall from under him and flopped backwards loudly to the floor. As soon as he hit the ground he heard a loud, "Holy shit," from Izuku, who jumped up to peer over the table to see if his teacher had knocked himself unconscious. It wouldn't be the first time that Shoyuta had miscalculated a flop and hurt himself, or the first time he had knocked himself out to avoid dealing with something. Shoyuta snorted. Kid, I got this sleeping bag custom made to be thick enough just so I can drop to the ground without breaking anything. Shoyuta chuckled. When after Izuku had retreated back to the couch, he heard a softer, "Holy shit." Shoyuta slept on and off while Izuku watched the marathon, sometimes softly singing along to the songs. He had hoped the boy would sleep too, but Izuku apparently didn't share his ability to sleep anywhere at any given time with 0 FS given. Maybe Izuku would get a decent night's sleep tonight after Hizashi left. They only had a few hours until school let out, and Shoyuta knew his friend would rush through all of his paperwork or put it off altogether, just to be here for Izuku. Just a few more hours and Hizashi could work his magic. Sometime during the second movie, something about a baby deer, Shoyuta had texted Namuri, asking her to pick up Eri from tutoring and watch her for the remainder of the day. Shoyuta wanted Hizashi to be able to talk with Izuku, help him relax and find a sense of security, and while Eri was a comfort to Izuku, she was about as helpful as a 6-year-old could be in this situation. Which wasn't much. He also texted Hizashi and let him know that Bakugo was involved in the whole mess, and to not let that bit of info slip. Shoyuta didn't want Hizashi walking into this blind or going after the volatile blonde. Things had been going well, but Shoyuta doubted they would continue like that for long. He knew the universe hated him, and had no doubt that it would try to screw him over. Shoyuta also knew that the only reason Izuku had been so open with him was because of how intimidating Shoyuta was and his no-nonsense attitude. That and mental exhaustion made people loose-lipped. Izuku had found himself on the wrong end of Shuta's capture weapon more than once. He knew he didn't stand a chance against Shoyuta, knew better than to hide things or fumble his way through lying. Being emotionally stressed worked wonderfully in Shuta's favor when it came to questioning the boy. Shoyuta just wishes Izuku hadn't kept everything bottled up, hadn't dealt with his problems all on his own until he burst with emotion. He has friends who would listen and not judge him, but years of isolation and abuse had taught him to keep his feelings hidden. An unhealthy safeguard against ridicule. Shoyuta wonders what would have happened if another teacher had found him. Would he have respected them or been intimidated enough to be truthful? Would he have been able to reassure them and redirect their worries and kept his pain hidden? Why hadn't he gone to his mother for help? Sure, the woman seemed to be more of an anxious person than her son, but she was still his mother. She could have done something. Well, he hoped she could have done something. Being a single mother probably didn't make things easy. What if Izuku had told her, would it have made a difference? Shoyuta shakes the thought from his mind. What ifs were pointless. No point in dwelling on those thoughts, or his concern on what kind of woman Mrs. Midoriya was. Izuku spoke lovingly of her, even if he danced around topics involving her. What mattered now was that he had gotten the truth out of Izuku, and whether the boy knew it or not, it would be a weight off his shoulders. Maybe not right away, but eventually, when everything was calm again and Izuku wasn't feeling the stress of his honesty. Shoyuta had slept for a movie and a half and was feeling stiff from being still so long, so he unzipped his sleeping bag and got to his feet and stretched. Izuku was momentarily distracted from the movie and looked up at Shoyuta, clearly surprised to see the man moving so soon. Shoyuta ignored him in favor of continuing his stretching, lifting his arms over his head and bending backwards slowly and carefully, muscles popping in satisfaction. His shirt rose up slightly in the front, revealing his midriff and belly button. The cool air of the apartment hitting his skin and made Shoyuta to shiver. Straightening and pulling his shirt down, Shoyuta turned to address Izuku, who was looking away, a slight blush to his face. Shoyuta quirked an eyebrow and huffed. "What?" he asked, crossing his arms and turning to face Izuku completely. Izuku mumbled something incoherent, not making eye contact with Shoyuta. Shyness is so illogical. You'll have to speak up and clearly if you want me to be able to understand. Shoyuta said exasperatedly. "You're hairy," Izuku said awkwardly. His blush was even darker. "Why does the world hate me?" Shoyuta blushed too and looked away. "Oh, I'm a man, so it's only logical that I would be hairy." "Right," Izuku said, and started to mumble quietly to himself. Shoyuta couldn't hear what he was saying, but he had taught himself to read lips and could make out some sentences like, "Will I be that hairy?" or "When will I start to get hairy?" And reality hit Shoyuta like a bag of bricks, hard. This kid has had no male role model in his life. Sure, he knew that before, knew he has been raised by his mother. An awkward, emotional and sweet woman from what he's been told. But a woman nonetheless. And in this moment it really hit him that Izuku has never had a man around to teach him the things that little boys need to be taught. Shoyuta had seen his poor excuse for a tie, but chose not to intervene, believing that Izuku would eventually learn on his own or Ida would show him. How behind is Izuku compared to the other boys in his class? What doesn't he know that he needs to know? Does he know about, nope, Should's mind doges, that line of thought like a bullet? There's a class for that. Shoyuta mentally can't handle that. I am not giving him the C talk. But he can at least address Izuku's rambling musings. Hair is a safer topic by a long shot. You'll grow hair too. I would assume either dark green or black. And it doesn't just grow on your stomach, it goes all the way down. Shoyuta cleared his throat and Izuku blushed even darker. Might be in a few months, might be a few years. Pibarwai is weird like that. I grew facial hair before Hizashi. I was 16, he was 18. Tensei can barely grow facial hair at all. It's different for everyone, so don't worry about it. Shoyuta finished, scratching the back of his neck. Izuku nodded his head quickly in acknowledgement, and Shoyuta worried briefly about whiplash. So, Shoyuta continued, I'm going to take a bath. I plan on patrolling tonight. Just chill out in here and watch movies, or you can go take a bath in the student baths. Whatever you want, just come back here when you're done. I think I'll go take a bath, Izuku said, jumping up from the couch and making a beeline for the front door. Poor kid was probably embarrassed out of his mind, and Shoyuta wasn't too far behind. Shoyuta called out for Izuku to leave his phone alone, startling a yes sir from him. Hizashi would have handled that better. Shoyuta thought as Izuku left the apartment. Hizashi probably would have even offered to take a bath together, since he had absolutely no shame. Shoyuta stopped before reaching the bathroom. Note to self, don't let Hizashi drag Izuku into a bath with him. Or explain Pibarwai. Shoyuta shuddered at the thought. Hizashi could be too extreme at times, and Izuku was way too shy to deal with that. Shoyuta was almost tempted to indulge in a long bath, but decided against it and made quick work of washing himself. Once finished and with a towel wrapped securely around his waist, Shoyuta made a mad dash for his bedroom. He almost slipped on the floor in his haste. Let's not die bare but naked for your student to find. He hadn't heard Izuku come back, but that didn't mean he wanted to be caught naked out in the open. No more awkward looks and conversations. He was done being dad for the day. Once in his room, Shoyuta went about putting his hero outfit on. Normally, being dad to a student wouldn't bother him, when he was less stressed and more prepared. But everything had happened so suddenly. One moment he had a student, a very problematic student, capable and strong. Then he had a broken child, hurting and apparently needing a father figure. It didn't help matters when it was almost instinctual for Shoyuta to step in and fill that spot. He had done it before, though nowhere near as much or as strongly as he has for his current students. Nowhere near as much as he was willing to do for Izuku. He just needed time to process everything. Then he would be able to go on handling things. He just needed a break. Yuta made his way out of his room and to the kitchen. He was just starting a pot of coffee when Izuku came back, hesitantly opening the door as if his welcome had been revoked in the short time he had been gone. If Hizashi hasn't been kicked out yet, then I'm not going to do it to you, kid. Come in and shut the door. Yuta grouched. His niceness was waning. He really needed to get out and bust some villains' heads. Just a few minutes until school lets out. Izuku came the rest of the way inside and shut the door behind him. He had changed the pajamas he had been in to a fresher pair. He was wearing a plus ultra neon yellow shirt with a pair of All Might themed pajama pants, to Shuta's horror, and he was finally wearing a pair of socks. He had a small rucksack with him, and when Yuta looked at it, he mumbled something about it being a change of clothes for in the morning. Izuku made his way back to the living room to continue watching movies while Yuta fixed himself a cup of coffee. He thought about joining Izuku in the living room, but decided to give the kid some space. Teens don't usually like adults hanging around them. Sitting down at the kitchen table, Yuta pulled out his phone and started flipping through the hero news. Mount Lady had apparently used Kamui Woods like a human wooden sword to fight a villain earlier that morning. It wasn't long before Yuta could faintly hear the sounds of his students moving around the dorms. He knew they were probably wondering where Izuku was and what was wrong. He would make sure to assure them that Izuku was safe before he left for patrol. Somebody should have told them that Izuku was feeling sick and that Yuta was taking care of them, but it didn't hurt to ease their worries. Even if he was going to be lying, maybe he'd just avoid them and let someone else deal with it. Shortly after most of the sounds from downstairs had settled some, there was the sound of racing feet down the hall followed by Hizashi's obnoxious rapping on the door. I swear, if he's freaked out my kid students by running, I'll cut all his hair off, braid it into a rope, then strangle him with his own hair. Yuta got up from his seat at the kitchen table and marched towards his door, throwing it open and pulling his friend by the collar of his shirt into the apartment. Hizashi let out a loud shriek as he was unceremoniously dragged past the kitchen and into the living room. Izuku sat at the couch, wide-eyed at seeing his homeroom teacher manhandle his English teacher. Yuta shoved Hizashi onto the love seat and walked back to the front door. I'm going on patrol. Eri is going to be back before her bedtime at 8, I'll be back around 11 or 12. And with that Yuta left the apartment, closing the door loudly behind him. Dramatic beach. Hizashi thought fondly. Hizashi and Izuku started at each other for a few minutes before Hizashi decided to break the silence. So how's Dadzawa been treating ya? Not expecting to hear his homeroom teacher he called Dadzawa, Izuku burst into giggles. A huge grin spread across Hizashi's face at being able to make the lil green bean laugh. He quickly undid his directional speaker from around his neck and set it on the floor beside his seat. Yeah. Listen to this. Hizashi started. He was going to troll his friend so hard if it meant making Izuku forget his worries for a moment. Sho makes a habit of adopting kids. That's why I dubbed him Dadzawa. And I may or may not have let the nickname slip to some third years, so don't be surprised if you hear it being whispered around school. Although Eri was the closest he had ever come to actually adopting a kid, and probably would once the foster trial was over. And Izuku might find himself second in line too. Once Izuku could breathe, he asked, "Aren't you afraid he'll be mad at you when he finds out you let that slip?" Hizashi laughed and shot Izuku his signature finger guns. Nah. Yuta doesn't scare me, little listener. We've been friends for too long. I'm practically immune to his gruffness and glares. Besides, I don't like to think before I speak. I like to be just as surprised as everyone else about what comes out of my mouth. Izuku gaped at Hizashi like he was speaking in tongues. Someone not affected by Mr. Aizawa's glares. Even the blind had to be affected by his teacher's glares. They were that strong. I can see you don't believe me. Hizashi gasped, grabbing his chest over his heart like he had been physically stabbed. But I've been immune since senior year. I convinced Tensei to wear one of those T-Rex costumes with rollerblades, while I sat on his shoulders dressed as a princess with Barbie girl playing from my directional speaker and holding a banner that said "Happy Birthday, Yuta." Tensei used his quirk and we zipped around the school like madmen for everyone to see until one of the teachers tackled us and suspended us for a week. Nemuri recorded the whole thing and Shuta's expression. I've been immune to Shuta's glares since, because none of them come close to the glare he gave me that day. Izuku started at Hizashi with wonder and horror. Wonder at how such an amazing and daring person could be sitting in the living room in front of him. And horror at how this person was even still alive. How Mr. Aizawa had even let him live. Hizashi wondered that sometimes himself. Maybe Lady Luck was on Hizashi's side. You're insane, but you might also be brilliant. Izuku gasped. Hizashi preened at the half-compliment. Izuku giggles, he definitely understood why his teacher called present Mika cockatoo. Izuku had so many more questions to ask the hero about his and Aizawa's teenage years and the shenanigans they got up to, but he was interrupted before he could ask. So, lil dude, wanna talk about how you're feeling? Hizashi asked. Izuku hesitated a moment. Do I have to? Hizashi shook his head no. You don't have to, but let me tell ya, putting it off isn't going to make things easier. You'll have to talk about everything that's been going on with you sooner or later. Might be easier using me as a crash course now, that way it won't be as hard when you have to talk to an actual therapist. Plus, the more you talk about it, the easier it gets to keep talking about it. I don't really like talking about myself, at least not about important things. Izuku admitted. Hizashi nodded his head in understanding. Shoyuta was the same way. Easier to not get judged or mocked if you don't reveal anything. Hizashi suggested. Yeah. Izuku whispered. He had pulled his legs up to his chest and wrapped his arms around them. Hizashi recognized it as shielding. Hizashi remembered Shuta's therapist mentioning it. She stated that some of the forms of shielding involved pulling legs up in front, crossing arms, holding things in front of themselves, or clinging to a person. She had been surprised that Shoyuta only crossed his arms, and it was mainly out of agitation. She had thought Shoyuta might be using Hizashi as a shield when he had said that Hizashi would attend the sessions whenever Hizashi wanted. But she was quick to realize that Hizashi was the one who wanted to attend, and that Shoyuta was just humoring him, although Shoyuta admitted that he took comfort in having someone constant and trustworthy with him while he was being forced to be vulnerable. Izuku shielding meant he didn't entirely feel safe. At least subconsciously. Even though Hizashi would never hurt him and Izuku knows that. It just proved that Izuku didn't completely trust adults, even ones who had earned his trust. Hizashi tucked his feet up under him. He had left his boots at the front of the dorm and had put on a pair of slippers that he had lost somewhere in the kitchen when Shoyuta had dragged him in the apartment, and leaned on the armrest and propped his face up on his hand. He was intentionally making himself look smaller, less intimidating and more comfortable looking. Hizashi was tall, not Yagi or All Might tall, but he was a decent height. So when he curled up his long legs like this, he looked a little silly. A grown man trying to be smaller than he is. Shoyuta said he looked ridiculous, but it never failed to get Shoyuta to loosen up some. Hizashi rambling also helped Shoyuta relax. So, Empedocles jumped into a volcano to prove he was immortal. He wasn't. Can see Bakugo being conceited enough for that. You would have to kill around 359 people to be able to make a sword out of the blood of your enemies. Marmosets teach their offspring not to interrupt in conversations. Tenya might need to learn from them, sorry Tensei. Apparently Victoria's Secret's bombshell perfume repels mosquitoes better than any repellents on the market. So I wear that during the summer. The media thinks that I got me a lover who likes to wear it. A pineapple can eat you. It contains protein that degrades meat. Izuku snorted and seemed to relax like Hizashi hoped he would. His grip around his legs released and he put his arms around his midsection. He leaned his back against the couch but he kept his legs in front of himself. A little progress was still progress in Hizashi's opinion. How about this? Why don't you tell me what you're comfortable with me knowing? Hizashi suggested. He left out the fact that he knew basically everything. He just wanted Izuku to warm up to talking to him. Having multiple mellow willing to listen to you helped with self-esteem and eased burdens. Izuku began. My dad lives overseas for work. Hizashi nodded to show that he was listening and waited for Izuku to continue. I haven't seen him since I was small. I don't really remember him. Do you miss him? Hizashi asked. He knew from the group chat that Shoyuta didn't think much of Izuku's absent father. But what was important was what Izuku thought of him. Izuku shook his head no. I don't know him, so I can't miss him. I guess I miss the idea of him. Of having a dad. I just don't miss him personally. Izuku admitted. Why? Hisashi asked, copying the question Eri liked to ask the most. Izuku thought about it for a minute. Never let it be said that Izuku answered a question without giving it though, unlike Hisashi. Hisashi's big mouth was going to be the death of him one day. Because I only know the person I hear over the phone, and it didn't take long for me to decide that I didn't like that person. Why? Hisashi was starting to feel like a redundant toddler. Because when I didn't get a quirk when I was supposed to, I could tell he wrote me off. He didn't want to talk to me as much as he had or at all really, and he stopped asking my mom about me, so I quit trying to getting on the phone to talk to him. I know he quit asking because I never heard her talk about me. She would always gush about me when asked, so when she stopped, I knew it was because he stopped. Then he started calling less and less. And I saw how it hurt her. So I didn't ask about him, because I didn't want to remind her. But I knew she thought about him. I saw how she would wilt when she saw couples, complete families. How holidays, anniversaries, and birthdays she would wait for a call. How excited she would get when he did, and how she would sneak off to cry when she didn't. Izuku was leaning forward now, his feet firmly on the ground and fists clenched at his sides. It seemed he didn't have a problem venting about his father like he did about being bullied. It's been so hard for her. I know me being quirkless for so long pushed her past her limits, stressed her so much. And I saw how frustrated she would get when she wasn't able to do something he should have been there to do. So I tried to take care of the things he would have done around the house if she's let me, and that would make her happy, but she would say how proud Hisashi would be of me at the little man I was becoming. Hisashi was a little stunned that his name was so similar to Izuku's father's. He hoped it didn't bother the little listener. Hisashi remained silent. He didn't want to say anything and stop Izuku's rant. The boy clearly had been holding in a raging inferno of anger, and he needed to let it out. Let it all out. Then maybe addressing his other problems wouldn't be so hard. She would compare me to him and I hated it. Hated him. But I couldn't tell her, because she loved him. He could do no wrong and she loved him. Loved him even though he abandoned us, and I couldn't break her heart with my feelings. Not more than he already had. He stopped caring about me, all because I didn't develop a quirk when I was supposed to. What kind of father does that? I heard him tell her something must be wrong with me, that he couldn't have a quirkless son. That was the only time they ever argued. Well, it wasn't much of an argument. She mainly just told him he didn't mean what he was saying, and apologized for upsetting him. But her stress was because of me. He might call once a year now, and she lives for those moments. And I can't be happy for her because I wish he would stop altogether, so she could move on. She deserves better. And I hate how for years I would look at other kids with their dads and want that. Want him to come home so I could have that. But he never came home, I never got that. And I hate him for it. And I hate that I hate him. Izuku had curled in on himself, shaking, and had covered his face with his hands. Hisashi was in shock. To hear and see how much anger the boy, who had been secretly WA's sunshine boy, felt was a slap in the face. How good at hiding emotions was this kid, that no one had even the slightest idea that he was in this much pain. And why the F did his mom put up with that sheet? Let Izuku be exposed to that? Hisashi wanted to find this kid's dad, scream using his quirk, and tell the man how much he had screwed up. How could he turn his back on his family? Over a quirk not showing up. Hisashi doesn't think he could live overseas away from a wife and child for years. He couldn't live down the road from a family even for a few minutes. Hell, he was constantly pestering his own parents and friends constantly. Hisashi just needed to be around them. He can't blame Izuku for his feelings, doesn't blame him. This kid clearly needed a dad growing up, maybe that would have helped with Izuku's bullying problem. It's clear that Hisashi is no dad, heck, he probably would have bullied Izuku too. How had Mrs. Midoriya not given up and moved on for the sake of her son? Why wait? Hisashi stopped himself. He wasn't going to start judging Izuku's mom. He was feeling worked up and it was causing him to want to put blame on her. she was closer, she was around, and it was easy to push blame on her because of that. Hisashi had met her, he doesn't know a kinder more soft-hearted person. Maybe a little overly anxious and protective. But she was it. Sweetheart. Whoever Hisashi had been, before he became a absent sucky dad, it was clearly good enough to gain Midoriya Inko's love and loyalty. He couldn't fault her for being in love. Taking a few deep breaths to calm himself, Hisashi got up and went to sit beside Izuku. He gently patted Izuku's green curls, comforting Izuku without overwhelming him. If Izuku wanted more, he would give it, but he didn't want to push his affection and comfort onto the boy. Izuku leaned into Hisashi's touch, clearly enjoying the attention. It reminded Hisashi of a cat. They sat like that for a while, Hisashi petting Izuku's head, and Izuku with his face in his hands. "You're disappointed in me, aren't you?" Izuku mumbled from between his fingers. "Nope," Hisashi said immediately. Izuku's head snapped up, knocking Hisashi's hand away. "You're not?" he asked incredulously. Hisashi, ever the over-affectionate person that he is, pulled Izuku into a headlock and ruffled Izuku's hair. Once he let go, Izuku's curls were in more disarray than before. Izuku reaches up to try and tame his hair into a more presentable appearance. Hisashi laughed. "You're allowed to feel anger and hate, little dude." Hisashi told him. "You're so DMN forgiving, it's actually a relief that you can hold a grudge. You're human, you're allowed to be bitter over the way your dad treated you and your mom. It's fed up and pisses me off, and I don't even know the man. Sure, holding on to hate can be hurtful to yourself, but nobody can expect you to just get rid of it all of a sudden. It's not like you can just throw it away. It takes time." Izuku was shocked at hearing his teacher curse so openly. The rest of the school was not surprised that the voice hero had a sailor mouth, at least after today they didn't. Izuku had clearly missed his quirk-induced cussing that Vlad had ended up putting a stop to before Namuri could. Hisashi was still sore from being tackled. "So it's okay to feel this way?" Izuku asked tentatively. Hisashi leaned back into the couch and patted Izuku's back. "Yep. But you should definitely tell your mom how you feel. She loves you and deserves to know just how much you are hurt by your father's actions." Izuku leaned back too, he looked exhausted. But being emotionally open and revealing secrets tended to do that. Shoyuta usually napped after he had to do either. "I guess it's only fair. I just think it will do much good." Hisashi nodded, though Izuku couldn't see because he was looking away. "Your mom loves you. If she knew you were hurting this bad, she would do anything to fix it." Hisashi didn't miss Izuku's small frown, but figured he was worried about stressing his mom out. "Want to talk about the rest or nah?" Hisashi asked. Izuku sighed resigned. He was probably overly tired of talking about himself and his past. Not much to tell. He slouched down deeper into the couch, making himself comfortable. Hisashi copied him, but propped his feet up on the coffee table. Having long legs had its perks, and Shoyuta would probably cut his long legs off if he saw Hisashi with his feet on the table. Which was stupid because how was it fair that Shoyuta could sit his big butt on the table, but Hisashi couldn't put his pretty feet on it? When I was little I was thought to be quirkless. So I was bullied because of it. Mainly by Kaken. Kaken was what Izuku calls Bakugu. So that's how the blonde was involved. Hisashi thought. He would use his quirk to blow up my things. Action figures, notebooks, things like that. He would sometimes use it to singe my clothes, not often because that was hard to explain away. And sometimes my skin, never enough to leave lasting damage, and never anywhere noticeable. Hisashi was appalled. To use your quirk against someone like that was a crime. And to have the mind to not leave lasting damage, that meant Bakugu knew what he was doing was wrong. Hisashi wanted to scream. I didn't have any friends until I started school here. Everyone was either on Bakugu's side, or they were too afraid to draw attention to themselves. The teachers either turned a blind eye or egged them on. Hisashi had to stop himself from making fists. He didn't want to spook Izuku by showing how angry he was. Our last year of middle school, Kaken told me to take a swan dive off the roof and pray for a quirk in my next life. That same day I was attacked by a villain and rescued by All Might, who then told me I couldn't be a hero because I was quirkless. Ironically, it was on a roof that he told me, Like life was trying to push me to do what Kaken had suggested. Then I ended up helping save Kaken from that same villain the same day because it had escaped. Then miraculously I got my quirk on the way home and All Might even offered to train me. To go through so much in a span of less than 24 hours, that definitely had to have been hard to deal with. Just hearing about it made Hizashi feel like he was on a roller coaster, ready to puke. So that day was the worst and best day of my life. Well, it was the worst until everything with the League and the Yakuza happened. But Kaken's doing better now. We aren't friends, but we aren't enemies anymore. We're rivals, our relationship isn't healthy, but it's better than it was. Way better. Izuku closed his eyes, he looked defeated and ready to sleep for a few years. Hizashi didn't blame him. He could feel tears desperately trying to free themselves from between his eyelashes, but he fought them back. He could cry for Izuku later, when he was alone and wouldn't startle the poor boy. For now, he just settled on pulling Izuku close to his side and tell him about his own experiences with bullying. Hizashi carded his fingers through Izuku's mop of hair. When I was a kid I got bullied too. I was the scrawny kid that was always too loud. Everyone knew that I had damaged my parents' eardrums when I was born, and that over the years of growing up and learning how to use my quirk had caused them to go permanently deaf. Izuku nodded his head, having already heard about that from Mr. Aizawa. He snuggled closer to Hizashi, providing comfort for the both of them. Kids would tease me all the time. They called me a loud-mouthed villain, because only a villain would make his parents lose their hearing. They didn't care that it was something that I had no control over. Doctors had wanted my parents to keep a quirk suppression collar on me, but they refused. How would I control my quirk when I was older, if I didn't learn how to grow with it and learn control? Izuku gasped. If you had worn that, then when you did finally remove it, your quirk would have been out of control and you would have hurt others and yourself. Hizashi nodded. Yep. Luckily, my dad is a pediatrician, so he knew that. He was really set at my doctor for wanting a quick fix, even if it wouldn't actually fix anything. I was homeschooled throughout elementary school as I learned how to control my quirk. When they thought I had enough control not to hurt anyone, they let me go to middle school. Well, the kids saw me as something new to pick on, going so far as to say that I had the eyes of a villain, that I looked crazy. They teased me about my shades, said I was trying to hide my villainous eyes. They were just a part of my style, and they were prescription. I had my glasses broken more than once by mean kids. Although they stopped when my mom told the school that the next kid to break them, their parents or the school would have to pay for replacements. Izuku laughed. Your mom sounds cool. Hizashi beamed and hugged Izuku tightly. She totally is. She told the school that if they didn't crack down on the bullies and get them to leave me alone at school, that her layers would crack down on them. Nobody touched me after that and I was finally able to make friends. They fell silent after that, and Hizashi started to quietly hum to fill the silence. Hizashi was never able to stay quiet for long. Eventually he felt Izuku go lax beside him and his breathing evened out. Hizashi wondered how many times he had fallen asleep today from mental exhaustion. Looking at the time on the TV had cut to sleep mode after inactivity. He saw that it was just after 7. Namuri would be bringing Eri back soon. Hizashi got up from beside Izuku and pulled the kid into his arms and lifted, and almost dropped him because hot damn this kid weighed a ton. Hizashi wasn't as strong as Shoyuda, but he was no pushover. So as quickly as he could, Hizashi carried Izuku to Shuda's bed and tried to put him on the bed as gently as he could. Hizashi seriously just wanted to dump the kid with the way his arms were protesting. Once Izuku was tucked in, Hizashi made his way to the couch and sat down with a thump. Of all the sweet, loving, overly forgiving, when it came to Bakugo at least, people to have been treated that way, it just had to be that green bean. Any other person would have used that as their tragic backstory and become a villain, or at least killed Bakugo. But Izuku had persevered and it had paid off. Hizashi was so caught up in his thoughts that he didn't notice Namuri slip into the apartment with a half-asleep Eri. It wasn't until Namuri stood in front of him and kicked him in the ankle that he registered her presence. He looked up dully at her. She must have asked him something, but he had missed it. I said. Namuri grumbled, "Where is Midoriya?" Hizashi pointed to Shuda's bedroom. Nemuri nodded and turned around, carrying Eri, who was already in princess pajamas, to Shuta's bedroom. Hizashi flopped over on the couch on his back, pulling the blanket that had been bunched up at the end of the couch over himself. When Nemuri came back, she walked over and took Hizashi's shades off his face and put them on the table. "At least take your jacket and shades off," she chastised. "Don't wanna." Hizashi grumbled. "That bad?" she asked. "That bad?" he replied. She nodded her head and patted him on the forehead before turning and quietly leaving the apartment. Hizashi closed his eyes and slowly drifted off to sleep, thinking about buying Izuku a "Put Your Hands Up" radio pajama set. It was 12:30 a.m. when Shoyuta made his way back into the apartment. The only light in the house was a soft glow from the TV in the living room. Kicking his shoes off at the door, Shoyuta meandered into the living room. Hizashi was on the couch, snoring lightly. Despite what most people would think, the voice hero was actually quiet when he was sleeping. His quirk wouldn't activate when he was asleep. It's only when he was awake that he was loud. Leaving the living room, Shoyuta made his way to his bedroom. Inside, on his bed, were Izuku and Eri sleeping soundly. Izuku was asleep on his back with his arms tucked under the pillow behind his head. Eri was sleeping on her stomach with one arm wrapped around Izuku's neck. It looked like she had him in a chokehold. Izuku didn't look uncomfortable, so Shoyuta didn't move her. If Izuku could sleep through Eri's MMA sleep style, then all the power to him. He left the room and closed the door partially behind him. He made his way back over to Hizashi and nudged him awake. Hizashi was a light sleeper. Years of being a hero and always on alert tended to make you that way. It only took a couple of nudges to wake him up. He jerked awake and his unfocused eyes blearily looked up at Shoyuta. He looked like he was glaring, and he might be, or it could be because he didn't have his glasses on and couldn't see for sheet. Hizashi's eyes were red-rimmed and looked like he might have been crying at some point. Shoyuta couldn't understand how he had managed to surround himself with so many criers. "I'm home," he whispered to Hizashi. "Take off your jacket and go back to sleep." Picking up his sleeping bag from in front of the coffee table where he had left it earlier that evening, he made his way to Eri's room, not waiting for a response. She had a small twin-size bed that was just big enough for him to sleep comfortably on. Once he was wrapped in his sleeping bag, he collapsed onto her bed. Today had been tiring, but he knew tomorrow would be a lot harder. Not just for Shoyuta and Izuku. Bakugo was in for a hard day too. But with the beginnings of sleep taking over, Shoyuta found it hard for him to care. Tomorrow was for the Shoyuta of tomorrow to worry about.